LoveLore Library. Chapter 100. Extreme heat and extreme heat intertwined. The ice was not big, but it occupied the remaining space. Xinyu had no place to put her tongue, so she could only dance with it. There was no way to retreat. The ice gradually melted in her warm mouth and slid down from her slightly open lips. Shang Junlin let go of Xinyu and licked the water off her chin. Xinyu leaned on the man's arm and panted slightly. "It's really delicious." The man's lips were close to Xinyu's skin. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his words came through the gap. Xinyu only felt that the heat on her body was getting more and more obvious. She ate ice, but she only felt heat. "Your Majesty, let go of me. It's so hot." Xinyu steadied her breathing for a while and pushed the arm that was tightly wrapped around her waist. Shang Junlin's body temperature was too high, like a big heater. This kind of temperature was very comfortable to hug in winter, but it was very uncomfortable in summer. Especially now that it was the hottest time in Dahuan. Although there was ice in the room, in order to take care of Xinyu's body, there was not much ice. The two hugged for a while, and it only made them feel hot from inside out. Shang Junlin saw that Xinyu's face was red, and a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead. He had no choice but to loosen his grip a little. Why are you so afraid of heat? Were you like this in the past?" Xinyu was stunned by Shang Junlin's question. She couldn't help but ask herself in her heart, was she also afraid of heat in the past? She didn't think so. In her previous life, she was only afraid of the cold. Winter was very difficult to endure, but when summer came, she was not like now. "I wasn't like this in the past." Xinyu looked at Shang Junlin. "Before entering the palace, I shouldn't be so afraid of heat." Shang Junlin raised his hand and stroked Xinyu's face. Her white cheeks were dyed light pink, and her temperature was indeed a little high. In comparison, Shang Junlin's hand was colder. It felt very comfortable to touch her burning face. Xinyu unconsciously tilted her head and rubbed against his hand. She squinted her eyes slightly like a delicate cat. "Let the people from the Imperial Institute of Medicine come and take a look." Shang Junlin held Xinyu's face and gently bit his lips. Imperial Physician Gu was invited over. Before they arrived at Yuzhang Palace, the palace servant who invited them had already informed Imperial Physician Gu of Xinyu's situation as instructed. The more Imperial Physician Gu listened, the tighter his brows became. There must be a demon behind this abnormality. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with Xinyu's sudden fear of heat. In fact, with Xinyu's physique, he shouldn't be so afraid of heat. Imperial Physician Gu carefully checked Xinyu's pulse, but he still couldn't find anything wrong with his pulse. Looking at Imperial Physician Gu's expression, Xinyu knew that the result this time was the same as before. Other than the sudden fear of heat, there was no other discomfort in his body. Actually, there is another possibility. Imperial Physician Gu pondered for a moment. After a period of recuperation, Gue Jun's body gradually returned to normal. It is normal for him to be afraid of heat. In the past, Gue Jun's body was disturbed by cold air. No matter how hot the outside world was, it would be offset by the cold air. Since he couldn't find any other reason, Shang Junlin temporarily believed Imperial Physician Gu's words. After a while, the sky was already dark. After instructing Eunuch Meng to send Imperial Physician Gu away, Shang Junlin picked up Xinyu and pressed his forehead against Xinyu's. "I hope everything is as Imperial Physician Gu said." Xinyu patted the back of his neck. "I'm really fine. I've never really felt the summer temperature of Dahuan's capital. Maybe it's because my body can't adapt to it that I'm more afraid of heat than ordinary people." Shang Junlin reluctantly believed this explanation and grunted. Xinyu purposely changed the topic. "Your Majesty, has the candidate for disaster relief been decided? The imperial court is still discussing it. Jin intends to send Fang Jun. Shang Junlin sat down with Shin Yu in his arms, to enter the cabinet. Fang Jun's current achievements are still a bit lacking. Fang Darren is fair and honest. It's good that he's going to Subei. The aristocratic families won't let go of this opportunity. Yu is right. The aristocratic families have repeatedly failed and can't sit still. If there isn't a member of the aristocratic families among the officials sent to Subei, they won't easily agree. Does your majesty want them to go? And, the matter of Subei can't be delayed. Jin doesn't want to waste too much time on this matter. If they are willing to do a good job, Jin will naturally reward them well. The ministers all knew the importance of Subei. They didn't encounter any resistance in organizing disaster relief. Although the aristocratic families and the humble families had accumulated grievances for a long time, they wouldn't ignore the big picture in this matter. Those who didn't care about the big picture had already been dealt with by Shang Junlin. Those who were able to stay until now didn't allow themselves to make major mistakes. They may have their own thoughts, but in the face of such a matter, no matter how many thoughts they had, they would be well hidden. The officials who would go to Subei to provide disaster relief were quickly determined. With Fang Jun as the leader, an official from the aristocratic families as the assistant, and a few other minor officials, the group paid their respects to the emperor at the palace gates and headed to Subei with supplies. Considering the internal problems of Subei, Sun Zhao returned to Subei first. Only his confidants knew that he came to the capital with a light carriage. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he didn't show his face in the capital. Other than Fang Darren, the other ministers didn't know that the report about the disaster in Subei was personally delivered by Sun Zhao to Shang Junlin. Not long after Fang Darren left, the capital was hit by a rain. The high temperature was finally dispelled a little. After the rain, the weather was cool and refreshing. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin changed into casual clothes and left the palace. Shin Yu planned to take a look at the operation of the shops. The carriage clattered on the bluestone-paved road and passed through the alleys. In the carriage, Shin Yu sat beside Shang Junlin and talked to him about the shops. Some of the shops in my hands were left to me by my mother. These shops are the same as the manor. They didn't go through Jinbei Ho's hands and were directly handed over to me. The rest of the shops were awarded to me when I was conferred the title of noble lord, and some were given to me by Jinbei Ho before I entered the palace. Although Jinbei Ho's mansion was declining, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. After generations of accumulation, Jinbei Ho had a lot of good things in his hands. When Shin Yu entered the palace after concubine Ru's marriage, Jinbei Ho was worried that he would be resentful and gave him 3 times more dowry than usual. Of course, Shin Yu wouldn't refuse free things. He took as much as Jinbei Ho gave him. I haven't seen these shops since I entered the palace. Since I came out with your majesty today, I can take your majesty to see them. Shin Yu was in a hurry when he entered the palace. After the shops were given to him, he didn't have time to check them one by one. He could only hand them over to his subordinates to handle. The account books were handed to Shin Yu through Mushi every month. Even if Shin Yu didn't have a chance to see them, he had a certain understanding of the situation of these shops. As the emperor, Shang Junlin had a lot of assets. There were special officials in charge of these, so he didn't need to worry about them. After a while, the carriage stopped in front of a shop that sold the 4 treasures of the study. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin got off the carriage and stood outside. They saw the words Wen Xian Pavilion written on the plaque. This handwriting. Shang Junlin looked at it for a moment and whispered in Shin Yu's ear, "Did you write it?" When the man spoke, his hot breath hit her earlobe. Shin Yu reached out and touched it. "I wrote it casually. I didn't expect them to use it as a plaque." "Ah, you, when are you going to write some for me?" Shin-Yu felt his fingers being rubbed by something soft. He nodded. Your Majesty can write anything you want. Let's go in first. Although this shop wasn't on the busiest street in the capital, there were a lot of people coming and going nearby. Shin-Yu could feel people looking at them from time to time. Shang Junlin chuckled and let him go. He held Shin-Yu's hand and walked into the shop. As soon as they entered the shop, they could feel that this shop was different from other shops. A light incense lingered in the shop. Because they sold the 4 treasures of the study, the decoration of the shop was very elegant. Brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were arranged in different categories. When they came in, they could directly choose what they wanted. The decoration of this shop is very novel. There were shelves that were about the height of a person in the room. The shelves were separated by a partition. Brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were placed on the partition for people to choose from. Customer, you have good taste. This arrangement is specially ordered by the boss. If you want anything, you can go to the special area to take a look. Look over there, that's the experience area. After you choose what you want, you can experience it there. On the other side, there's also a rest area. If you're tired, you can take a rest. The waiter in a uniform green robe introduced them one by one. Let's see it ourselves. The waiter tactfully retreated to the side. Shin-Yu walked around with Shang Junlin and picked a little of each item. This paper is interesting. In front of Shang Junlin were 2 kinds of rice paper in light blue and light pink. The former was printed with a light green bamboo, and the latter was printed with a large piece of blooming peony. They were placed in exquisite wooden boxes. Shin-Yu took a box of light blue paper and called the waiter. Where's your boss? He said that a young master surnamed Yu is looking for him. The waiter had never seen Shin-Yu before, but he knew that Shin-Yu and Shang Junlin had an extraordinary aura. He had been in the shop for a long time and knew that such people were either rich or respectable. He didn't dare to neglect them. Please wait for a moment, I'll go now. After the waiter left, Shang Junlin lowered his voice and asked, Did you also come up with these designs? He knew that Shin-Yu had a lot of strange ideas, from big ones that could shake the imperial court to small ones that could create new snacks. Now, there was this new shop that was full of novelty. It really brought him surprises all the time. I just made some small suggestions. I didn't expect them to make the finished products so quickly. I use small suggestions often make things extraordinary. Shang Junlin tapped his forehead. Water control method, cement method, ice making method, which one of them wouldn't cause a huge sensation? While they were talking, the shop owner quickly walked over. The shop owner was a middle-aged man in his 30s. When he heard that a young master surnamed Yu had come to the shop, he hurried outside. Young master, do you want to talk inside? The shop owner saw that Shin-Yu was acting intimately with a tall man and his footsteps were almost floating. He knew Shin-Yu's identity, so the identity of the man who came with Shin-Yu and acted intimately with Shin-Yu was self-evident. Shin-Yu turned to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin looked back at him. If a Yu wants to go, then go. Shin-Yu was about to answer when a green-clothed waiter hurriedly ran over. Shopkeeper, it's not good. Those people are here again. What happened? It's nothing. Young masters, please come with me to the inner room for a while. How can it be nothing? The green-clothed waiter's face showed disgust. Those people just see that our business is better than theirs, so they often come to harass us. They don't even know how to reflect on themselves. Shut up. The shop owner sternly reprimanded. While they were talking, the noise came from afar. Oh, there are quite a lot of customers in the shop today. Boss, have you considered the suggestion I made last time? Chapter 101. The shopkeeper's face became ugly. He didn't want to disturb the nobles. He just wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. He coldly said, "I said, it's impossible. Look at you, you don't have anyone behind you. Why don't you merge with my shop? Then you won't have to worry about anyone finding trouble with you in the future, right?" The speaker's tone was sloppy, like a cat teasing a mouse. "You don't have to worry about my business. You are not welcome here. Please leave." The shopkeeper's attitude was firm. After a few words, the man had already walked in front of them. Shinyu also saw clearly what kind of person came to find trouble. He was about 20 years old. He was wearing a golden robe and a golden crown inlaid with various colored gems. The feeling he gave people could be described with one word: rich. His appearance was not bad. He was waving a golden fan. From inside to outside, the word dandy was written. The man swaggered in with a group of servants behind him. The old customers in the shop were accustomed to this scene. The new customer caused some disturbance, but it was quickly pacified. "Who is this person?" Shinyu asked. He didn't remember anything related to this person. He thought that this person was not an official. "He is the young master of Minister Jin's family. Since the shop opened, he comes here every few days. At first, he just wanted to buy some brushes and ink. Later, he began to ask me to merge the shop with his shop." The shopkeeper smiled bitterly. This shop was newly opened. He was also the owner of a shop. But he encountered some bad things and had to sell the shop. He happened to meet Shinyu's people and became Shinyu's subordinate. After the shop changed its owner behind the scenes, Shinyu ordered to change the business model. The originally deserted shop suddenly became popular. Even if it was in a remote location, there was an endless stream of customers every day. Later, with the introduction of patterned rice paper, its reputation spread and the business became better. At this time, the young master of the Jin family insisted on buying the shop. In the blink of an eye, the young master of the Jin family had already arrived in front of the four people. He closed his fan and pressed it against his chin. "Then tell me, what do you want to agree to my request? Do you want me to let you manage the shops under my name? That shop of yours has always been losing money. What's the use of giving it to us shopkeepers?" The green-robed servant was indignant. "Isn't this your shopkeeper's miraculous hands? If I remember correctly, this shop has been losing money before, right?" Jin Gongzi was not angry even after being rebuked. His expression was still the same as before. Shinyu observed him for a moment and found that he was really not angry. He originally thought that this person was looking for trouble, but now it seemed that this was not the case. What exactly did this young Master Jin want to do? "Don't look for me again, I won't agree." If he didn't feel that Jin Gongzi had no malice, the boss wouldn't have talked to him. Why? From time to time, the eyes of the surrounding guests swept over them. Shinyu saw that Jin Gongzi was unwilling to give up, so he said, "Let's talk somewhere else." Young Master Jin was reluctant. He wanted to ask, "Who are you? Why can you make the decision?" But seeing that the boss had no objection, he silently swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. The four of them went into the inner room. The boss glanced at Shinyu, and Shinyu nodded slightly at him. "I can't agree to your request, no matter how generous your conditions are, because this shop doesn't belong to me," the boss explained. "Ah." Jin Gongzi was dumbfounded. "Haven't you always been the owner of this shop? You know about my past." He didn't know anyone with a status like the Jin family before. "You haven't moved your shop, so of course I know that you used to be the owner of this shop. I also know that there were always people looking for trouble with you. You didn't sell the shop to that person, right? You might as well sell it to me." The boss had a headache because of his jumpy thoughts. "What are you thinking? Now this shop is young Master Yu's." Jin Gongzi followed the boss's line of sight and looked at Xinyu. Xinyu nodded slightly. No wonder you are so respectful to them, it turns out that they are the new owners. Jin Gongzi muttered. Now can you tell me what's going on? Xinyu said in a low voice. The boss also wanted to know why Jin Gongzi was so diligent. Jin Gongzi was stared at by several people, so he didn't look away. It's Zhou Dingxing. I don't get along with him. When I saw him instructing his servants to make you unable to stay in this place, I didn't let him succeed. Since you now have a new owner, you won't be bullied by him anymore. These days, the Zhou family didn't come looking for trouble because you stopped them. No one knew who the real owner of this shop was except for him. At first, he was curious about why the Zhou family stopped. He didn't expect that someone was secretly helping him. Jin Gongzi swaggered into the shop every day with a group of servants. When the Zhou family saw it, they didn't dare to do anything. Although the Zhou family was a little rich, they couldn't be compared with the Jin family. The misunderstanding was cleared up, so Jin Gongzi left with his servants. The purchase of the shop didn't go through Xinyu's hands, so he didn't know about it. Now that he knew, he couldn't completely ignore it. What's going on? Xinyu's knuckles tapped on the wooden table. Before Gongzi's people found me, I was already at my wit's end. The Zhou family took a fancy to this place and wanted to take it by force. At that time, the shop's business was not good, and someone maliciously hindered it, so the old customers also ran away. After a period of renovation, the shop was closed for a period of time. When it was reopened, the Zhou family didn't come looking for it. He thought that Xinyu's people warned the Zhou family behind their back. He was just a small boss, so he couldn't do anything to the Zhou family. But for any aristocratic family in Beijing, the Zhou family was nothing. Since you work for me, if there's anything you can't solve, just tell me directly. Xinyu would naturally protect people who worked for him conscientiously. Xinyu looked at the shop's account book and asked about the shop's situation and future plans. The boss of the bookstore knew what was going on, so his answers were basically satisfactory to Xinyu. There were other shops to check, so Xinyu didn't stay for long. How much does you know about the boss of this shop? In the carriage, Shang Junlin fed Xinyu a peeled pine nut candy. Xinyu was greedy and asked Shang Junlin to buy the pine nut candy when they passed by a small stall just now. Shang Junlin always agreed to Xinyu's small requests, so he got off the carriage and bought 2 packets. The pine nut candy was very sweet. Xinyu narrowed his eyes with satisfaction. At that time, I was in the palace, so I couldn't do many things myself. So I handed them over to my subordinates. At that time, my subordinate sent me a message saying that there was a shop that needed to be sold. All the requirements met my requirements, so I asked them to buy the shop. Later, I learned that the original boss of the shop had been doing this for generations, so I let him continue to manage it. The boss's surname is Yi, and he has lived in the capital for generations. He's kind and doesn't have any bad relationships with people. As for his relationship with the Zhou family, I'm not sure. Xinyu couldn't know everything that happened to every one of his subordinates. This person gives me a familiar feeling. Shang Junlin frowned. Maybe it's my illusion. If your majesty is worried, then let the hidden dragon guards check it out. Check on the Zhou family too. Okay. Then, the 2 of them went to the jewelry shop. This shop was located in the busiest area in the capital. There was an endless stream of people coming and going. They didn't enter the shop, but went to the backyard from the side. Among all the shops, this shop had the most beautiful accounts. It even opened a branch not long ago. Xinyu didn't expect a woman's purchasing ability to be so amazing. After receiving the news, the shopkeeper put down what he was doing and welcomed the 2 of them in. Young master, have some tea. This shop was left behind by Xinyu's mother. The shopkeeper was also an old man by Shin Yu's side. In the past few years, the shop wasn't doing well, and the shopkeeper felt guilty. Later on, with the prescription given by Shin Yu, he developed a new product and it became one of the most profitable shops in the capital. Only then did the guilt in his heart disappear. He worked harder and harder. Shin Yu only gave him a few new products. The shopkeeper came up with different ways to make and sell them. Some were for the ladies of aristocratic families, and some were for ordinary ladies. The former was exquisite and expensive, while the latter was cheap and expensive. Both were very popular. Shin Yu took a sip of tea and listened to the shopkeeper talk about the results. There was a trace of a smile in his eyes. "You've done well." The shopkeeper was flattered. "You flatter me. If not for the prescription given by you, I wouldn't have been able to revive the shop." Not only was the business flourishing, but they also opened a new branch. There were partners who took the initiative to come to them. "Young master, there is one more thing. Some time ago, a young master named Yan Jing came to us and asked if we could talk about cooperation." The shopkeeper remembered something important. "I can't make a decision on this matter. Does young master want to cooperate with him? What kind of person do you think he is? Is he worth cooperating with?" Shin Yu put down his cup. Yan Zheng, the person who took the initiative to give money to the Ministry of Works to build roads, had also had a meal with them. He came to me several times. He has an extraordinary way of talking and acts appropriately. If young master wants to find someone to cooperate with, you can consider him. It seems that shopkeeper Su thinks highly of him. Shopkeeper Su had worked for Shin Yu for so many years, but the number of times he praised someone like this was very few. "I just think that the idea he put forward is very reasonable." Shopkeeper Su turned around and took out a book from the shelf. "I organized this according to his ideas. Young master, you can take a look first." Shin Yu took it and skimmed through it. He had to admit that this plan was very perfect. Everything that needed to be considered had been taken into account. "Ah Lin, take a look too." After Shin Yu finished reading, he handed the book to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin gently nodded after reading it. Shin Yu knew that he could only take out more things in the future. If he wanted to cooperate, it would definitely be long-term. Before cooperating, he should at least have a certain understanding of the partner. "I will consider the cooperation. If he comes to you again, tell him that I will talk to him personally." Shin Yu paused for a moment and added, "Before that, you should organize Yan Zheng's information and give it to me." "Yes." Shopkeeper Su was surprised. He didn't expect that Shin Yu would come in person. He silently remembered this matter. In the blink of an eye, it was time for dinner. "Are we going back to the palace or after dinner?" Shang Junlin asked in the carriage. "Let's go to the Yingxing Tower." Shin Yu had a good impression of the Yingxing Tower. The carriage turned around and drove towards the Yingxing Tower. "Your Majesty, you didn't seem very happy just now." "Why?" Shang Junlin wasn't very happy in the second half of the conversation with shopkeeper Su. "If you want to cooperate, you can just let his subordinates do it. He doesn't need to do it personally." It turned out that it was because of this matter. Shin Yu laughed out loud. "What are you laughing at?" Shang Junlin pinched Shin Yu's chin, his eyes deep. "Your Majesty, don't you think that today we are particularly like a husband accompanying his wife to inspect a shop?" "Two guests, please come in. Would you like to sit in the hall or in a private room?" "Private room," Shang Junlin said. "Okay, please follow me." Yingxing Tower was very lively. The hall was full of people. It was different from the simple and elegant decorations during the imperial examinations. The whole Yingxing Tower was brightly lit and magnificent. The difference was huge. It didn't seem like the same restaurant at all. When they went up to the second floor, they could occasionally hear the sound of musical instruments from other private rooms. Enchanting Tower does other business. Shen Yu stopped. Are you talking about the sound of musical instruments? They are not from our tower. Some guests will bring 1 or 2 girls to add to the fun. Shen Yu faintly said, yes, and changed the topic. You seem to be very different from before. You mean during the imperial examinations? Our boss specially ordered us to open this time every 3 years for those who go to the capital to study for the imperial examinations. The rest of the time, we operate as usual. Your boss is a wonderful person. The waiter led the 2 of them to a private room. Shen Yu ordered the dishes with ease. Do you have any new snacks recently? What a coincidence. We happen to have some in our tower recently. The waiter introduced them non-stop. Shen Yu chose a few with pleasant names. Sure enough, the customers of this restaurant are usually high officials and nobles. After the waiter left, Shen Yu sighed. The price of each dish was several times more expensive than the last time they came. If it's like before, this restaurant can't continue to operate. Do you want to drink water? Shen Yu nodded. He happened to be thirsty. Shang Junlin took the teapot on the table and poured a cup of tea for the 2 of them. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, the dishes were served one by one. The last one was Shen Yu's dessert. The fruit was cut into small pieces and mixed with milk evenly. There were finger-sized ice cubes inside. It was similar to what Shen Yu ate in Yuzhang Palace. Shen Yu stirred it with a spoon. This is. Customer, you have good taste. This is a recipe from the palace. It's best to eat it in summer. This is also the best-selling dessert in our tower. Shen Yu scooped a spoonful and put it into his mouth. He didn't know how the milk got rid of the fishy taste, leaving only the sweetness. The fruit was fresh and juicy. With the cold texture, eating a bowl of it in the hot summer was indeed a pleasure. After Shen Yu tasted it, he looked at the other bowl. There were also ice cubes in the other bowl, but the fruit was cut into smaller pieces. Instead of milk, there was a transparent liquid like water in the other bowl. The waiter followed Shen Yu's gaze and introduced, there's fruit wine in this bowl. Don't worry, it's not intoxicating. Children can also eat it. There was a curfew in Dahuan. After a while, they wouldn't be able to stay on the streets. Official Fang kept in touch with the imperial court every day. After Yun County, they would reach the border of Subei. The situation was getting worse. In order to ensure that they could reach Subei as soon as possible, official Fang chose the shortest route. There was an army accompanying them on the way, so they didn't have to worry about bandits. Even so, they were still ambushed near Subei. There weren't many casualties, but a batch of disaster relief supplies was stolen. The atmosphere in the main hall was oppressive. Shang Junlin sat on the dragon throne and looked down coldly. Ministers, what do you think about this matter? I think that this matter must be investigated thoroughly. The Prime Minister was the first to stand up. I second that. With the first to stand up, the other ministers also stood up one after another. This matter will be handed over to the Prime Minister to handle. When they returned to Yuzhang Palace, Shang Junlin immediately hugged Shen Yu. Shen Yu felt that the man was in a bad mood. He patted him on the back and asked, "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" Fang Jun and the others encountered bandits. Shen Yu paused. Where did the bandits come from? How dare they steal disaster relief supplies from the imperial court? They were attacked in Yun County. I've already asked the Prime Minister to investigate. I'm afraid that this matter isn't as simple as it seems. Are official Fang and the others all right? I secretly sent some people to accompany them. If it weren't for these people, the loss wouldn't be so small. Shang Junlin's eyes were cold. These people obviously know the Imperial Court's arrangements very well. However, the Imperial Court's arrangements for disaster relief are public. Many people know about it. It's hard to determine who did it behind the scenes. Shen Yu touched Shang Junlin's neck. Your Majesty, have some water first. You, feed me. Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's face. Your Majesty, let go of me first. Shang Junlin let go. Shen Yu walked to the table and poured a cup of tea. Shang Junlin didn't take it and just looked at him. Shen Yu had no choice but to raise his arm and feed the tea to the man's mouth. After drinking the tea in this position, Shang Junlin took the cup from Shen Yu's hand and put it aside. He hugged Shen Yu again and said in a daze, I don't understand. Those are disaster relief supplies. Millions of people in Subei are waiting for them to save their lives. Why did they steal them? Your Majesty, you don't need to understand what these people are thinking. Just find out who did it and deal with them directly. There's no need to waste your breath. Yu is right. They only need to know that they are destined to pay for what they have done. We're missing a batch of supplies. Will the supplies that official Fong and the others brought be enough? Shen Yu thought of the most important problem. They can last for a while, but they must make up for the shortage as soon as possible. The Minister of Revenue is already gathering supplies. Shang Junlin thought of something and smiled. The Minister of Revenue was the one who reacted the most when the news came back. He was so angry that he directly scolded the robbers in court. It scared the ministers. They probably didn't expect that the Minister of Revenue, who has always been gentle and polite, would have such a side. Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh when he imagined the scene. Chapter 103. Yun County. The people with the remaining supplies temporarily stayed in place to rest. Lord Fong took a pot of water and walked to the other side. The closer he got to Subei, the more he could feel the heat and drought. Yun County was close to Subei, but it was also affected by the drought. The ground cracked, the flowers and plants on the roadside drooped their heads listlessly, and even the wind blowing in his face was hot. Not far from the relief team, a group of men in tight-fitting uniforms hid in the dark. Everyone wore a black mask with strange patterns on their faces, which tightly covered the upper half of their faces. It was because of the sudden appearance of these people that they did not suffer heavy losses. Before the incident, even Fong Jun did not know that there was such a team following them. Lord Fong expected that this trip would not be smooth sailing, but he did not expect those people to be so bold. The people they sent just happened to be able to suppress them. Lord Fong did not dare to imagine what would happen to them if Her Majesty did not have a backup plan. As he walked, Lord Fong recalled what happened at that time. It happened in the middle of the night. Except for the people on night watch, everyone else was fast asleep. Lord Fong was awakened by the sound of weapons clashing. His subordinates heard the sound and rushed over to protect him. Those people's purpose was clear. They were here for the relief supplies, so they did not use fire. In the sound of fighting, they gradually lost and fell into a disadvantageous position. Seeing that another cart of supplies was stolen, Lord Fong took his subordinate's sword and desperately slashed at the thieves. He hit the target, but he was also exposed to the enemy. A cold light flashed behind him, but it was too late to dodge. Fong Jun was not afraid of death. He only hated that he could not complete Her Majesty's task and send the relief supplies safely to Subei. The sharp sword approached. At the last moment, with a clatter, the long sword was flicked away and fell to the ground with a bang. Then, there was the sound of a sharp weapon stabbing into a wound. Lord Fong wiped the blood splashed on his face. Only then did he realize that a group of people in black had filled the gap between the soldiers and fought with the enemy. In the dark night, these people in black were like ghosts, wandering the battlefield and taking away the enemy's life. The situation was reversed in an instant. "Everyone, please drink some water." Master Fong walked to the front of the group, but didn't approach them rashly. After defeating the bandits, these people stayed behind to protect them in the dark. Later on, they were attacked a few more times. With these people around, they didn't suffer any losses. Instead, it was the other party who lost many people here. Lord Fong could faintly smell the scent of blood. Without any explanation, he handed the water bottle to the leader. "Are you injured? I've brought some emergency medicine." "Wait for me, I'll get it for you." "No need." The voice of the men in black was as cold as the masks on their faces. "This is the medicine that I specifically requested from Imperial Physician Gu of the Imperial Hospital before I came here. You know Imperial Physician Gu, right? He's an Imperial physician who specializes in nurturing the noble lord's body. His medical skills are very brilliant. I thought that this trip would not be peaceful, so I asked for some emergency medicine. See, it just so happens that I can use it." Lord Fong could sense that the young man in front of him wasn't too old. Furthermore, the other party had saved his life, so he had a good impression of him. Hearing the name, the man in black swallowed his words of refusal. "I know that you're protecting us because you're following orders, but you should also protect yourselves. If you're injured, how are you going to protect us? The same goes for the people you brought with you. If you need anything, just say it." Lord Fong couldn't help but ramble. The young man chuckled. Do the people in the imperial court know that Lord Fong is so meticulous? I don't need them to know what to do. Lord Fong waved his hand. I'll go get the medicine for you. Wait a moment. Lord Fong came back with the medicine. There were several bottles of medicine of different sizes. At a glance, one could tell that it was Imperial Physician Gu's style. Seeing the young man take the medicine and stuff it into his clothes, Lord Fong smiled with satisfaction. You can't ignore your health. Remember to apply the medicine properly. Thank you for the medicine, Lord Fong. The man in black clasped his hands. No need. If anyone should thank someone, I should be the one thanking you for saving my life. Lord Fong stopped him. Then, his expression turned serious. I'm afraid that the next part of the journey won't be easy. I'll have to trouble you. After Lord Fong finished speaking, he went back. He was the main person in charge of the disaster relief this time. There were still many things to do. After resting and reorganizing, Lord Fong took people to count the supplies. He wrote down the losses and surplus in a memorial and sent it back to the imperial court. Then, he took people to continue north. Their mission had just begun. After receiving the memorial from Subei, Shang Junlin immediately summoned the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue to discuss the next step of the plan. Subei involved a lot of people and was a solid barrier for Dahuan in the north. No matter what, nothing could happen to it. Imperial Physician Gu seems to have something on his mind. Did something happen? After taking his pulse, Shen Yu saw that Imperial Physician Gu was distracted and asked. It's this subject's younger brother. He said that he had to go out for a few days. It's been more than 10 days and there's been no news from him. Imperial Physician Gu didn't have any friends who could talk about these things. He was really worried, so Shen Yu couldn't help but ask. Gu Huai. Yes, Xiao Huai has never been separated from me for so long in his life. I don't know where he went or if he's in danger. Imperial Physician Gu frowned slightly. Don't worry, Imperial Physician Gu. Gu Huai will be fine. Thank you for your comfort. At night, Shin Yu nestled in Shang Junlin's arms and asked about Gu Huai. Your Majesty, do you know where Gu Huai went? Why are you suddenly asking about him? Shang Junlin pinched Shin Yu's face. Who said something to you? Shin Yu, it's Imperial Physician Gu. He was worried about his younger brother and said a few words to me. Shang Junlin, do you still remember that I sent people to secretly follow Fang Jun? Shin Yu, Your Majesty is saying that the person who secretly followed Lord Fang to Subei was Gu Huai. Shang Junlin nodded. Shin Yu, why did Your Majesty think of sending him? Shang Junlin, first, no one in the court knows about Gu Huai. Sending him is convenient to avoid people's eyes and ears. Second, I see that he is a talented general and want to give him an opportunity to perform meritorious service. The Dahuan Kingdom's way of becoming an official was fixed, and only the military officials had room to maneuver. But now that the Dahuan Kingdom was peaceful, and there was no war, this path had been blocked. If one wanted to become an official, they could only obediently follow the rules. I can't always personally lead the troops. Dahuan should also have a group of qualified military officials. Shang Junlin lifted a strand of Shin Yu's hair and twirled it between his fingers. After the disaster of the previous emperor, Dahuan's interior could be said to be devastated. The civil officials were still fine, but it was not an exaggeration to say that there was no successor for the military officials. When the previous emperor was on the throne, the capable military officials were all demoted or even killed for various reasons. The ones who replaced them were all idiots. If not for this, Dahuan would not have lost so many battles and lost so much of its territory. Does Your Majesty want to rehabilitate those generals? Shin Yu turned over and lay on Shang Junlin's body. Those generals are not the only ones who need to be rehabilitated. Many ministers who wholeheartedly served the country were also sacrificed. I want to wash away the stain on their bodies. While speaking, Shang Junlin stared into Shin Yu's eyes. Shin Yu couldn't help but blink. She lowered her head and rubbed Shin Yu's cheek. Your Majesty can definitely do it. Shang Junlin reached out and wrapped his arms around Shin Yu's waist. His eyes were as black as ink. If it was a Yu's wish to be a wise emperor, he was willing to be the most qualified emperor in a Yu's mind, as long as a Yu was willing to stay by his side forever. The disaster relief matters were arranged in an orderly manner. As for the bandits, Shang Junlin also handed them over to a general in the north. They were determined to catch them. However, they still encountered a problem in the disaster relief matter. A part of the supplies were stolen. Although the imperial court kept some as backup, it was not enough. Subei was too big, including the entire Subei army. The consumption was astonishing. It was unknown when the drought would end. If it dragged on for too long, the imperial court could not afford it. After the Minister of Revenue peeled off the second batch of supplies, he calculated the remaining quantity and had to come to Shang Junlin with a bitter face. At this time, Shang Junlin was discussing the alcohol with Shin Yu in Yuzhang Palace. After more than a month of trial and error, Shin Yu finally succeeded in producing the first bottle of medical alcohol. She sent the alcohol to Yuzhang Palace as soon as possible. Eunuch Meng walked in from outside. Your Majesty, the Minister of Revenue requests an audience. It's probably about the disaster relief supplies. Your Majesty, can I come with you? Shin Yu had some thoughts about this matter. Then you will accompany me to the imperial study. Therefore, when the Minister of Revenue arrived at the imperial study, he saw Shin Yu and Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. Although he did not understand why Your Majesty was here, the Minister of Revenue still bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, I have an important matter to report. Yes, Your Majesty. Your Majesty, with all due respect, the national treasury is not enough to support the disaster in Subei for a long time. If there is no other way, it can only last for a month at most. However, Your Majesty also knows that after the drought, there are often locusts, plagues, and other situations. I'm afraid that in a month, there was another very serious problem. After autumn, before winter, the nomads in the north would go south and rob everything they could. If Subei was still affected by the disaster at that time, Dahuan would be in danger. Do you have a plan? Shang Junlin certainly knew the seriousness of the problem. I have thought of two ways. One is to levy more taxes, and the other is to collect more taxes. These two methods can solve the urgent problem. The Minister of Revenue said in a deep voice. Shang Junlin frowned. The taxes in Dahuan were all collected at the end of the year. If they were collected now, many people would not be able to pay. Moreover, these two methods would take a certain amount of time to complete. From the local area to the capital and then to Subei, it would take too much time. It would also consume a lot of manpower and material resources. I also know that this method is not appropriate, but there was no other way for the time being. Your Majesty, I have an idea. Instead of levying more taxes and collecting more taxes, it will be voluntary donations. For the people, they will donate as much as they can. We can't affect their normal lives for the disaster relief. For the rich aristocrats or members of the imperial clan, we can give them a certain amount of rewards based on the amount they donate. This method focuses on the rewards. The rich all have a competitive mentality. Wouldn't it be better to let them donate voluntarily rather than forcibly collecting? The Minister of Revenue was a smart person. He could immediately figure out the difference between the two methods. If they were to change to voluntary donations, there would be no complaints. It would also give the donors a sense of honor. He cupped his hands and saluted Xinyu. Your Majesty is a great talent. Darren doesn't need to be so polite. The specific operation still needs Darren to take care of it. There are also the various vassals. Subei is in trouble. As relatives of the imperial clan, they should contribute to the country. After listening to Xinyu's words, the Minister of Revenue couldn't help but look at him again. He cupped his hands and said, I will do my best. Chapter 104. How did you come up with so many novel ideas? After the Minister of Revenue left, Shang Junlin hugged Xinyu from behind and asked. It's just a different way of expressing the Minister of Revenue's idea. No matter what it is, the feeling of being forced to do something and the feeling of voluntarily doing it is different. The more money and power a person has, the more they value a good reputation. After donating resources, they can obtain a good reputation recognized by the imperial court and the praise of the people. Why not? Xinyu had dealt with these people too many times in his previous life, so he had his own way of dealing with them. Although Dahuan didn't prohibit merchants, the status of merchants wasn't high. They had enough wealth in their hands, but they were still constrained by various kinds of restrictions. Any local official could bring them big trouble. Every year, the money they used to bribe various officials was not a small amount. Xinyu proposed that as long as they donated, they would be rewarded by the court. Those who contributed a lot could also get special rewards. Instead of spending money to build relationships with officials, it was better to build a good relationship with the court directly. Smart people knew what to do. After the Minister of Revenue returned, he immediately summoned all the officials in the Ministry of Revenue to discuss. The Ministry of Revenue hadn't had a good rest for several days because of this matter. They were in charge of Dahuan's money bag. Such a large national treasury needed to take care of the entire Dahuan. They couldn't just empty it for disaster relief. That would bring huge hidden dangers. Darren, did His Majesty approve our proposal? An official of the Ministry of Revenue asked. It didn't. His Majesty made some changes. Today, I summoned you to discuss the specific implementation. The Minister of Revenue spoke in a deep voice about Xinyu's proposal. What do you think? This method is wonderful. It's much better than the one we gave at the beginning. Yes, yes. This way, it won't be a waste of money. We don't have to worry about too much burden on the people, and we don't have to worry about riots afterwards. It wasn't that they didn't know that the original method would bring huge hidden dangers, but they didn't have a better method for the time being. They could only bite the bullet and use it. Now that there was a better method, of course, they would choose the better one. Only the first official who spoke had a flash of light in his eyes. What does Darrenly think? The previous method was proposed by Darrenly. Didn't Darrenly vow that there was no better method? I was too narrow-minded, Lord Leet said reluctantly. It's not Lord Lee's fault. Before the minister came up with a new idea, we didn't have any better ideas. I just don't know who came up with this idea. It really helped us a lot. That's right, that's right. Sir, please clear our doubts. There are many talented people around His Majesty. You will know in the future. The Minister of Revenue smiled. Sir, why are you still keeping us in suspense at this time? With the boulder in his heart removed, the atmosphere instantly relaxed. All right, let's discuss what to do first. His Majesty is still waiting for an answer. Everyone started a heated discussion. Outside the palace, shopkeeper Su sent a message saying that Yan Jing had come looking for him again. He followed Xinyu's instructions and told the other party that Yan Jing wanted to meet with Xinyu. When Xinyu read the letter, he did not avoid Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin peeled a grape and put it in Xinyu's mouth. When does you plan to meet him? Does His Majesty have time to go out of the palace recently? Xinyu bit the grape in his mouth. The slightly sour grape juice filled his mouth. Xinyu frowned and swallowed the grape. Shang Junlin noticed his expression. What's wrong? The grape is sour. A little. In fact, it was not bad. It was sweet on the whole, but there was a trace of sourness. Xinyu did not like to eat sour things. Then don't eat it. Meng Chang, don't serve this kind of grape in the future. Shang Junlin put down the grape in his hand and picked up a handkerchief to wipe his hands. Eunuch Meng hurriedly removed the grapes from the table. Xinyu drank a few mouthfuls of water to relieve the sourness in his mouth. If His Majesty does not have time, I will go out of the palace myself. Shang Junlin was very busy recently. He had to personally oversee the matters of the imperial court, the matters of Subei, and the disaster relief. Xinyu woke up several times, but Shang Junlin was still busy. I will go with you. No matter how busy he was, Shang Junlin would not let Xinyu meet Yan Jing alone. He did not forget the experience in Yan Zheng's eyes when they first met. Xinyu wrote a reply to shopkeeper Su and arranged the meeting to be in the afternoon 3 days later. After the finished medical alcohol was made, Shang Junlin gave a part of it to the Imperial Institute of Medicine to let them test the effect. A few days later, the Imperial Institute of Medicine received some results. When Imperial Physician Gu came to take Xinyu's pulse, he mentioned this matter. The medical alcohol that His Majesty gave to the Imperial Institute of Medicine can indeed reduce wound infections. The Imperial Institute of Medicine found some small animals and compared the wounds with and without alcohol. The former was obviously not infected and healed faster. Speaking of this, Imperial Physician Gu was very excited. He had studied medicine for many years and knew how serious the consequences of an infected wound could be. Many people died not because of the wound itself, but because of the infection of the wound. If the wound infection could be reduced, patients with large wounds would be more likely to be cured in the future. At the same time, the booklet from the Imperial Institute of Medicine was handed to Shang Junlin's desk. The booklet not only reported the results of this period, but also applied for a new batch of alcohol and permission to use it on wounded patients. After all, using small animals to test medicine was not the same as testing medicine on humans. What's more, the alcohol was sent to the Imperial Institute of Medicine by Shang Junlin's people. Any changes had to be reported to him. If it can really be used on humans, the soldiers at the border will be able to reduce a lot of unnecessary casualties. In Yuzhang Palace, Shang Junlin and Shen Yu talked about this matter with a slightly excited tone. Shang Junlin had entered the army when he was young, so he had a deep understanding of the living conditions of the soldiers at the border. He had experienced too many deaths and knew that many soldiers did not die on the battlefield, but died because their wounds were not properly treated in time. After Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he assigned military doctors to all the troops. However, the worsening of the wounds caused by the worsening of the infection caused by the wounds, and the military doctors were helpless. Shen Yu made some more and sent it to Yuzhang Palace yesterday. Your Majesty can give it to the Imperial Institute of Medicine. If it has the same effect on humans, we can start preparing to popularize alcohol in the army. Yu is right. If it can really reduce the casualties of the soldiers, Shen Yu can be considered to have made a great contribution. After the Imperial Institute of Medicine obtained the alcohol, Shang Junlin specially ordered them to be allowed to bring the alcohol into the Imperial prison. The prisoners in the Imperial prison were all criminals who had committed heinous crimes and were awaiting punishment. Among them, there were many who had been tortured. It was a good opportunity to test the effects of the alcohol. Led by Imperial Physician Gu, several Imperial physicians entered the Imperial prison with medicine boxes. Later, a terrifying legend began to spread in the Imperial prison. It was said that the Imperial prison set up a new type of punishment. The torturer wore white clothes and did something to the prisoners. The prisoners' heart-wrenching screams could be heard from afar. During that time, the prisoners in the Imperial prison were especially obedient. They would answer whatever questions were asked. The efficiency of handling cases was more than doubled. Isn't Imperial Physician Gu killing two birds with one stone? Shen Yu couldn't help but laugh after reading the booklet. The people from the Supreme Court also asked if they could directly arrange for a few Imperial physicians to be stationed in the Imperial prison. They said that the methods of the Imperial physicians were much better than torture to deal with some difficult prisoners. Shang Junlin also didn't expect such an unexpected development. Imperial Physician Gu and the others probably didn't expect that they would become a nightmare for the prisoners in the Imperial prison. Needless to say, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court really did visit the Imperial Institute of Medicine. This made Imperial Physician Gu and the others speechless. They studied medicine to save the dying and heal the injured, not to torture people. When alcohol came into contact with the wounds, it would indeed cause great irritation. Imperial Physician Gu and the others had tried to reduce this irritation, but to no avail. The prisoners had many wounds on their bodies. If they applied alcohol on a large area, it would definitely be unbearable for them. Official Fang and the others finally arrived in Subei. The black-clothed men who were secretly protecting them returned to their hiding places. The ones who came to greet them were Sun Zhao and two other officials from Subei, who had arrived earlier. After exchanging some pleasantries, they moved into the Subei government's residence. The other officials all breathed a sigh of relief. Only official Fang knew more than the others and didn't dare to let down his guard. When the supplies arrived, the officials from Subei and the officials from the Imperial Court began to arrange the disaster relief. Official Fang was led around by several enthusiastic officials from Subei to stroll around the area. Just by looking at this place, one wouldn't think that the disaster was serious. The road was very clean, and there weren't any seriously affected victims on the side of the road. Occasionally, they would see a few people walking by, but they were all in a hurry and didn't dare to look at them. Official Fong secretly remembered these abnormalities in his heart. Let's go back. Won't Official Fong continue to look around? It was impossible to see anything even if he continued to look. Official Fong became suspicious, but he didn't show it on his face. This official is tired. I'll go back and rest first. The two officials who accompanied him looked at each other. One of them, who had a goatee, said, Official Fong has traveled a long way to Subei. It's time for you to take a good rest. Rest assured, Official Fong, we will arrange the disaster relief. After returning, Official Fong wrote 2 memorials. One was to be sent to the capital from Subei, and the other was to be handed directly to the black-clothed men who were secretly following him. This unusual memorials wouldn't pass through the hands of any officials and would be sent directly to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin freed up an afternoon to accompany Xinyu to the palace to meet Yan Jing. The agreed meeting place was still Enchanting Tower. The waiter led the two to a private room. 2 guests, this is the place. Xinyu nodded to the waiter and walked into the private room with Shang Junlin. A man in a dark purple robe stood by the window with his back to them. When he heard the sound, he turned his head and saw Xinyu and Shang Junlin. His eyes flashed with astonishment. It's actually young Master Lin and young Master Yu. Quickly, please take a seat. Yan Jing quickly restrained the emotions in his eyes and greeted them warmly. I also didn't expect such a coincidence. Xinyu and Shang Junlin sat down. Yan Jing poured tea for the two. When I first met you, I felt that you two were very close. I didn't expect that we would have such a fate. Please. Xinyu picked up the tea and took a sip. I heard from shopkeeper Su that young Master Yan wants to cooperate with us. How does young Master Yan want to cooperate with us? Since the two of you came to see me personally, I won't keep you in suspense. I'm not talented, but I have several business routes. I wonder if the two of you are willing to sell these new products from the capital to other places. Yan Jing vaguely guessed the identity of the two people and subconsciously looked at Shang Junlin. No need to look at me. Everything in our family is decided by Madam. Chapter 105. Xinyu's hand that was holding the teacup paused. He suddenly realized that it was just as Shang Junlin said. Since he entered the palace, everything he did was not restricted. Even when it came to matters related to the imperial court, as long as he mentioned them, Shang Junlin would implement them. A strange feeling welled up in his heart. It was sour and hot. Xinyu used the action of drinking tea to cover the strange expression on his face for a moment. I didn't think it through. I punish myself by drinking a cup as an apology. Yan Zheng's face flashed with a trace of unnaturalness. He picked up the wine jug, poured himself a full jug of wine, and drank it all in one gulp. Lin. Yan Zheng was stuck. He really couldn't call the two words, Madam, in front of the elegant young man. You, Shang Junlin picked up a piece of fish for Xinyu with his chopsticks. You can call him young Master Yu. Young Master Yu. Yan Zheng had always been generous when it came to banquets. This time, he ordered all the famous dishes of Enchanting Tower. The cost of a table was not small. Yan Zheng didn't immediately talk about business. Xinyu was also not in a hurry. When both sides were almost done eating, they talked about cooperation. Xinyu had the intention to cooperate. Otherwise, he wouldn't have personally come to see Yan Zheng. He just had shopkeeper Su send him away. His identity meant that there were many things he couldn't personally take care of. If there was a reliable partner, it would be much more convenient. Where does young Master Yan want to sell these things? Xinyu put down his chopsticks and wiped his mouth. To be honest, I want to sell these things outside the pass at a high price. Yan Zheng directly said his plan. Outside the pass. Shen Yu raised his eyebrows. Does young Master Yan have a trade route to outside the pass? Because of the loss of a large area of land during the reign of the late emperor, De Huan didn't open the trade route to outside the pass. Of course, there was no explicit ban on merchants doing business outside the pass. As the relationship between Da Huan and other countries stabilized, there were gradually developed merchants who specialized in traveling inside and outside Da Huan. They would sell Da Huan's goods outside the pass at a high price, then bring back goods from outside the pass and sell them at a good price. However, the risk was very high. After all, without the protection of the government, the slightest carelessness could allow robbers to rob them. The loss of property was small, but in serious cases, they could even lose their lives. I have some connections. Yan Jing smiled. Compared to De Huan, I prefer to earn money from people outside the border. Yan Zheng was obviously prepared in advance. Their conversation was organized and clear. Shen Yu also expressed some of his own ideas. Shang Junlin also joined in the discussion. The final plan was more perfect than the initial one. The smile in Shen Yu's eyes deepened. This was the advantage of cooperating with a smart person. There was no need to explain too much. Just point out a point and the other party would understand what it meant. It's not convenient for me to appear often. Shopkeeper Su will discuss the details of the cooperation with you. If you have any other questions, you can look for Shopkeeper Su directly. Shopkeeper Su is in charge of the trading of these items. Shen Yu didn't want to go out of the palace often because of this kind of thing. Compared to doing it personally, he preferred to let his subordinates do it. Okay, I'll talk to Shopkeeper Su about the details. In addition to the items suitable for women, I have some other goods that are suitable to be sold outside the border. If there is a chance, I look forward to continuing our cooperation in the future. I also hope to cooperate with Gongziyu for a long time. Oh right, has Gongziyu heard about the donation order that the Imperial Court is planning to release? The official version hadn't been released yet. The Ministry of Revenue was still discussing the specific reward measures. However, some people who were close to the officials of the Imperial Court had already received the news in advance. For example, Yan Jing, who had formed a relationship with the Ministry of Works because of road repairs. After receiving the news from the officials he was close to, Yan Zheng had been preparing for this matter. He wasn't a short-sighted person. Of course, he knew how beneficial this matter was for merchants. This was directly receiving the approval of the Imperial Court. It was more useful than having a good relationship with any local official. For them, it was only a little money. Bribing anyone was the same. If they could establish a relationship with the Imperial Court and gain a good reputation, why not? You're talking about the donation to Subei. Shen Yu didn't expect the Ministry of Revenue to act so quickly. The news had already been leaked. Yes, I don't know who came up with this idea. It's too beneficial for us merchants. The bosses I know and I have all decided to do our best. Every little bit counts. Yan Zheng casually mentioned it. The local aristocratic families will certainly be willing to contribute. Have the two of you heard that there are several families in Jiangbei that have stockpiled large amounts of grain and are planning to sell it to Subei? Shen Yu didn't know about this, but he remembered that in his previous life, several local aristocratic families had suddenly risen at this time. Later, they had provided a lot of convenience to the King of Yu. Your Majesty, why do you think Yan Jing told us about the local aristocratic families? Shen Yu asked after returning to Yuzhang Palace. He should have deliberately revealed it to us. If I'm not wrong, the Ministry of Revenue will soon receive this news. The price of grain in the market would be controlled by them. At that time, it would be time for them to wantonly amass wealth. Shen Yu didn't know how the matter in Subei was resolved in his previous life, but according to the subsequent development, it seems that many hidden dangers were buried. The vassal kings also have a lot of supplies in their hands. After operating for so many years, some people's private stores are even richer than the national treasury. It's not a day or two that I've wanted to move against them. The vassal kings were always a thorn in the emperor's heart. We can't rush to deal with the vassal kings, but we can collect some interest first. After enjoying the convenience of the imperial family for so long, it's time for them to contribute to Dahuan. Shin Yu hooked the corners of his mouth. Yu is right. Being led astray by Shin Yu, Shang Junlin had already begun to imagine what they could take from the vassal kings and use them in Subei. Does your majesty plan to transport these collected supplies to the capital and then to Subei? Shin Yu walked to Shang Junlin and sat down. If it's urgent, your majesty might as well directly transport them from the original place. But this way, special officials will need to be sent to the place to supervise this matter. Before arriving in Subei, the local garrison will escort them. After arriving in Subei, they will be escorted by the Subei army. Shang Junlin thought for a moment and felt that this was also a good idea. After the Ministry of Revenue's discussion, the matter of donating to Subei was raised in the morning court. Although the ministers had already heard the rumors, they still felt that it was inconceivable when they officially heard it. In particular, the Minister of Revenue's idea was that the bulk of the donations came from the people. It was undeniable that the method proposed by the Minister of Revenue could solve the current predicament of the imperial court, but this official thinks it's inappropriate. What's inappropriate? The Minister of Revenue glared at him. Or can Jia Darren think of a better way? Then this official will listen with respectful attention. How can the imperial court ask for money from the people? Isn't this embarrassing? How is this asking for money? Isn't it voluntary? As a citizen of Dahuan is in trouble, so it's reasonable to contribute. Or is Jia Darren unwilling to contribute? This official thinks that this method is very good. The Prime Minister stood up. To show my support, this official is willing to donate 1,000 taels of silver. The other two cabinet ministers also stood up and expressed their willingness to donate money in food. From the moment the Ministry of Revenue leaked the news, they knew that His Majesty was determined to do this. Rather than oppose it and make His Majesty unhappy, it was better to agree and contribute. Putting aside everything else, they also felt that this method was the most beneficial for Dahuan. They were already in the cabinet, so the first thing they had to ensure was Dahuan's stability. After the ministers' discussion, the method proposed by the Minister of Revenue was further improved. After it was finally confirmed that there were no mistakes, it could be implemented. The people in the capital who had connections heard the news and began to make preparations. Shang Junlin came back from court and didn't find Shin Yu in the room. Where is Gui Jun? Greetings, Your Majesty. The palace servant who was called hurriedly saluted. Gui Jun is in the small theater over there. Shang Junlin went to the small theater. The small theater was north of Yuzhang Palace. Shin Yu rarely went there. Some time ago, he had discussed with Shang Junlin to redecorate it. Before he walked in, he heard the sound of opera from inside. When did you like to listen to opera? Shang Junlin walked into the small theater and happened to see Shin Yu lowering his head and saying something to a person in a pink costume. Before he could be jealous, he saw Shin Yu waving at him. Your Majesty, come quickly. Let's see how this part can be changed. What are you doing? Shang Junlin didn't know what was going on and walked over. I'm making up a play for the people in the capital. Before the imperial court issues an order, let them understand the meaning of what they are doing. Chapter 106. This was what Shin Yu had thought of recently. The disaster relief method that the imperial court was about to announce was not only in Dahuan, but also in the previous dynasties. Unlike the ministers in the imperial court who understood this method after a dispute, the people of Dahuan didn't understand this method. If someone had evil intentions at this time, the people who didn't know the inside story would easily fall into the trap. Yu intends to use opera to let the people understand. Shang Junlin picked up the script in Shen Yu's hand and asked. Yes, I originally wanted to let some small officials explain it to the people. Later on, I thought that oral explanations might not be enough to reach the people's hearts. I have to find another method. It's best to mobilize the people's discussion and thinking. The people of Dahuan love to listen to opera. Shen Yu wanted to weave this method into the opera, and then let the opera troupe sing it for the people. Shang Junlin roughly flipped through the script. Right now, it was only a rough outline of the story. He was very familiar with the handwriting on the script. It was Shen Yu's. Yu is very thoughtful. After Shang Junlin finished reading the story, he felt that this story was just right. The disaster relief was linked throughout the entire story. Everything that happened in the opera revolved around it. What's more, Shen Yu also included the possibility that someone might maliciously misinterpret the imperial court's meaning. He was very thoughtful. Even if someone wanted to use this to cause trouble, their first reaction would be that it was a bad person in the opera. Shen Yu was almost done with his work. It just so happened that it was time to eat. He said a few words to the opera troupe and then left with Shang Junlin. I was scared to death just now. The woman in blue patted her chest. With the emperor here, I didn't even dare to breathe loudly. I didn't expect that the first meeting with the emperor would be under such circumstances. The slightly older man sighed. Their opera troupe specialized in serving the imperial family. When the previous emperor was on the throne, he liked to enjoy life. The opera troupe often went in and out of the palace. Later, the new emperor who ascended the throne didn't like to enjoy life, so the opera troupe was completely idle. He had taken over the position of the troupe leader from his master after the new emperor ascended the throne. He had thought that he would be able to show off his skills and bring the troupe to greater heights, but the truth was that the troupe had been silent in his hands until now. The troupe leader instructed the people below to continue preparing for the new show. This was their only chance. Whether or not they could make a beautiful comeback depended on this. It is our honor that Your Highness is willing to give us this opportunity. Everyone, cheer up. We must complete this matter perfectly and live up to Your Highness' expectations. Yes. Those who were able to enter this troupe were all ambitious. To be able to provide entertainment for the royal family, they had to be the best troupe in the capital. In the past, they didn't have this opportunity, but now that they did, they had to perform well and not tarnish the reputation of the troupe. Eunuch Meng had left and returned. The troupe leader asked nervously, I wonder if Eunuch Meng has any instructions. Although they rarely went in and out of the palace, they still knew that Eunuch Meng was the emperor's favorite person. I don't dare to give instructions. His Majesty specifically sent me here to tell you that after you have finished transcribing Your Highness's script, remember to hand it over to His Majesty. Eunuch Meng smiled kindly. I understand. So it was because of this matter. The troop leader let out a sigh of relief. You must do it as soon as possible. His Majesty doesn't like Your Highness's things to be in the hands of others for too long. Eunuch Meng emphasized. Yes, yes. The troop leader wiped the sweat from his forehead and watched Eunuch Meng leave. Troop leader, why did His Majesty suddenly ask for the script back? The man in pink walked over with a puzzled expression. Don't worry about it so much. Find someone with good handwriting and transcribe the script first. In just a short while, the troop leader had already seen how much His Majesty cared about this emperor. It wasn't surprising that he would ask for the script that Your Highness had personally written. I'll do it. I can also deepen my understanding of the role. The man in pink volunteered. He was playing one of the main characters and had a lot of scenes. He really needed to understand the script very well. The troupe leader hesitated for a moment before agreeing. The man in pink happily took the script and went to transcribe it. The others looked enviously at the back of the man in pink. They had all been retrained in the troupe. They had never entered the palace and had never seen the nobles in the palace. Before we came, the teachers in the troupe warned us that we must be very, very careful after entering the palace. The slightest carelessness will cause us to make mistakes. At that time, it would be a small matter if something happened to us, but if we implicated the troupe, it wouldn't be too much to ask for our deaths. As a result, I've always been very nervous. After coming here, I realized that it was completely different from what the teachers said. The youth who spoke was about 16 or 17 years old. His face still had a hint of immaturity and his eyes were clear. Me too. When I entered the palace, I had to be very careful with every step. I was afraid that I would take a wrong step. When I was waiting to see Your Highness, I was so nervous that my heart almost stopped. After seeing Your Highness, I realized that Your Highness is completely different from the nobles that the teachers said. He is approachable and doesn't put on any airs. If there is something that we don't understand, he will explain it to us. I just plucked up my courage to ask Your Highness a question. Your Highness' voice is really nice to hear. The youth who spoke laughed. I shouldn't have hesitated just now. Otherwise, I would have been able to ask Your Highness a question. It doesn't matter. Your Highness will definitely come again in the future. We still have a chance. Your Highness is beautiful, has a nice voice, and is talented. No wonder Your Highness is always favored. I envy Nan Xiao. He asked Your Highness a lot of questions today and Your Highness answered all of them for him. Now, he can even transcribe the script. I also want to, who doesn't want to? But our handwriting is not as good as Nan Xiao's. When the troop leader told us to practice our handwriting, we shouldn't have been lazy. The others nodded in agreement. Today's experience fully showed that good handwriting was really important. Before the new drama was finished, they needed to live here. Considering that most of the people who came were young, Xinyu specially ordered the kitchen to make some delicious food for them. After Xinyu entered the palace, the craftsmanship of the imperial chefs in the palace skyrocketed. Not to mention other things, they could be said to be handy when it came to cooking delicious food. With Xinyu's instructions, the deliciousness of the food the troupe ate in the palace was far better than outside. Master, when you came to the palace before, did you eat such delicious food? The large table of food was finished. The youths who were full collapsed on the chairs and became more and more curious about the senior in the palace. The middle-aged man who was called Master was silent for a while. No, these should be specially ordered by Your Highness. In the eyes of Your Highness, they were just servants. The food they ate was not much better than the palace servants. How could they be treated like today? It was not a secret that Xinyu summoned the performers to Yuzhang Palace. Although they did not know what Xinyu's purpose was, the ministers who heard the news still frowned. How can Your Majesty be so mischievous? The north is facing a drought, and you still condone Your Highness to enjoy himself. Your Majesty has favored the legitimate son of Count North for a long time. If you don't like it, you can impeach him. Now, who dares to impeach this matter? Look at what happened to the previous imperial censors. The ones who impeached the most ruthlessly have long disappeared from the court. Are you going to let Your Majesty be so mischievous? What do you think, Prime Minister? Is Your Majesty ignoring the court or what? Did Your Highness summon the troop into the palace affect the government? Has His Majesty been too lazy to enjoy himself and ignore political affairs? Your Highness has been in the palace for so long. Have you done anything harmful to Dahuan? The Prime Minister's series of questions made the ministers confused. They murmured. No. That's it. I say, you are all idle. You keep an eye on the affairs of the harem every day. Have you finished the government affairs in your hands? Have you understood the specific measures regarding the donation? Don't make me teach you step by step. The Prime Minister, who was almost crazy with work, really couldn't stand these people who didn't do proper business. Several officials were asked until their faces turned red. They lowered their heads and went back to do their own things. Yuzhang Palace. After the meal, Xinyu lay on Shang Junlin's lap and read a novel. The novel was bought from outside the palace. After knowing Xinyu's preferences, there would be palace servants who were responsible for purchasing the latest novel for Xinyu every month. After half a year, Xinyu had finished reading all the novels in the palace's library. When I went to the small theater, what was you talking about with the woman in pink? Xinyu was reading something interesting and was interrupted. She was stunned. What woman in pink? After asking, she realized what Shang Junlin was asking. She explained with a smile, that was a man. It's just that his frame was small and he was short. He was one of the main characters. He was asking me some things about the play. There are so many people. Why did he ask you? If you can't understand, you can just ask someone else. Shang Junlin twirled a strand of Xinyu's hair around his fingertips. Why is your majesty so unreasonable? Xinyu raised his head and looked at Shang Junlin with interest. Your majesty only saw him. Before your majesty came, many people also asked me questions. According to your majesty's idea, these people should be replaced. Shang Junlin pursed his lips as he imagined that scene. Xinyu raised his hand and poked Shang Junlin's chin. Is your majesty angry? I'm not. The next time I go there, I'll accompany you. Shang Junlin knew how good Yu was. It was normal for such a good Yu to be liked by many people. He just felt unhappy that his treasure was being peeped at by others. You're really not angry? Xinyu raised his head and asked. No, I'm not angry at you for this kind of thing. Shang Junlin denied. Okay then, Xinyu deliberately dragged out his tone. I originally wanted to kiss your majesty if you were angry. Since your majesty isn't angry, I'm angry. Shang Junlin suddenly interrupted Xinyu's words. I'm angry. Ha ha ha, Xinyu shook with laughter on Shang Junlin's legs. Your majesty just said that you wouldn't be angry over this kind of thing. I said that I wouldn't be angry at you, but I didn't say that I wouldn't be angry at others. Seeing that scene, Shang Junlin almost couldn't suppress the violence in his heart. Of course, he wouldn't blame you. He wouldn't be angry at you. He only blamed those who deliberately approached you. If Xinyu hadn't noticed his arrival and stopped him, Shang Junlin didn't know what he would have done. The violence in his heart could only be soothed by Xinyu. Shang Junlin stared fixedly at Xinyu. The affection in his eyes was like thick ink that couldn't be melted. His pupils were originally pitch black. When he stared at someone so intently, that person's reflection was imprinted in his eyes. It was as if he wanted to suck that person in. Xinyu was stared at by him and slowly stopped laughing. He could feel the drowning feelings in Shang Junlin's eyes. He propped himself up with one hand and hooked Shang Junlin's neck with the other, slowly approaching him. Then I'll kiss your majesty. Your majesty won't be angry, okay? Chapter 107. Xinyu's voice was very low. Every word seemed to have a hook, drilling into Shang Junlin's heart. Shang Junlin supported Xinyu's waist with one hand, supporting the young man's body. Xinyu saw that he would not fall, so he put his hands on Shang Junlin's shoulders. The distance between the two was getting closer and closer. They looked at each other, and each other's figure was reflected in their eyes. Their lips touched. The tremors suddenly increased. Shin Yu slowly closed his eyes and pecked the man's lips. Shang Junlin put his other hand on Shin Yu's waist, and his fingers clasped her flexible waist. He resisted the urge to tear the young man apart and swallow him whole, allowing the other party to touch his lips lightly. It was like drinking poison to quench thirst. Shin Yu knew that the other party would not be satisfied with such a touch, so he slowly pried open the other party's lips and entered. Similar to Shin Yu's usual style, there was no straightforward violence. Every movement was extremely seductive, and it was likely to lead people into the abyss of desire. Shang Junlin's breathing became heavier and heavier. When Shin Yu was about to withdraw, he took the initiative, captured the young man's lips, and heavily invaded. His attack was fiercer than ever before. His white and slender fingers weakly grabbed the black clothes on the man's shoulders, leaving wrinkles. However, at this time, no one cared about the marks left on the expensive clothes. After the kiss, Shin Yu leaned on the man's shoulder, panting slightly, "Your Majesty, are you still angry?" Shang Junlin's eyes were dark, and his voice was slightly hoarse. "If I say that I'm still angry, will you coax me again?" "What do you think, Your Majesty?" Shin Yu's voice was lazy, and a little hoarse. After his breathing calmed down, Shin Yu turned over and leaned on Shang Junlin's chest. The man put his arm around the waist and put it on Shin Yu's lower abdomen. Shin Yu glanced at the table. Shang Junlin's half-approved booklets were spread open on the table. There was also a thick stack of booklets waiting to be approved. "Your Majesty, please approve the memorials first." Shin Yu pointed at the pile of unfinished memorials. "You, accompany me." Shang Junlin rested his head on Shin Yu's shoulder, reached out to pick up a memorial and spread it open. This booklet was written by the Prime Minister, and it was about the examination of officials. Every year in Dahuan, there would be an official assessment. Based on the results of the assessment, the next year's official would be promoted or demoted. In the past, this matter was handled by the cabinet. The examination of the officials was set to take place in the winter, and the content of the examination was the performance of the officials for the year. Specialized officials would report the situation to the cabinet, and after the cabinet discussed it, they would report it to the emperor, who would make the final decision. During this period of time, the Prime Minister was very busy. Especially when he found that some officials were slacking off all day, he felt that it was intolerable. He directly asked the emperor to re-investigate the assessment of these officials in the past years. At the end of the memorial, he said that he hoped that the emperor could send a few useful people to help him. The other two ministers in the cabinet were also busy. They were busy with the affairs of the court and the family. They had to determine the amount of materials and gold to be donated before the donation was announced to the public. They couldn't let outsiders look down on the aristocratic families, and they couldn't let the emperor be afraid of them because of this. In addition, Shang Junlin was more assured to let the Prime Minister handle this matter. Compared to the other two ministers in the cabinet, the Prime Minister's shoulders were heavier. As for the officials, Your Majesty might as well send He Qingyu and the others to the Prime Minister's side. They can help the Prime Minister and also get some practice in advance. Shin Yu thought of He Qingyu and the others who were still in the Hanlin Academy and suggested, "I also have the same idea." In comparison, the Hanlin Academy is currently the most leisurely. The court is short of manpower, so they can get used to it in advance. The next day, He Qingyu, Jiang Huiqing, and Fang Jia, who were on duty in the Hanlin Academy as usual, all received the imperial edict from the palace. The three of them were stopped at the entrance of the Hanlin Academy. After the imperial edict was read, the eunuch who announced the edict urged them, "The three of you should quickly pack up and follow me to the Prime Minister's side." Jiang Huiqing and He Qingyu looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. Although they didn't know what was going on, they quickly packed up and were sent to the Prime Minister's side. The Prime Minister was sitting in the study dealing with official business. When he saw them, he said faintly, "Since the Emperor sent you here, you should do your work well and don't worry about anything else. Look over there, these are the things you need to deal with today. Go." After that, the Prime Minister lowered his head and continued to do his work. Jiang Huiqing looked at the place the Prime Minister pointed at and saw 5 stacks of documents on the small table. He couldn't believe his eyes. These were the things they needed to deal with today. A few days later, Jiang Huiqing rubbed his sore neck as he walked out of the Prime Minister's residence. These past few days, I've realized how difficult it is to be a good official. Every day, he had to deal with endless documents. Compared to working in the Prime Minister's residence, his days at the Hanlin Academy couldn't be more relaxed. The Prime Minister really doesn't have it easy, Fang Jia sighed. I always thought that my father was very busy. I didn't expect the Prime Minister to be even more busy. Although it's a bit tiring, I've learned a lot these past few days. Other than being serious about official business, the Prime Minister is very easy to get along with. The officials of the Imperial Court had also noticed that the Prime Minister had been following the top 3 of this year's batch. He brought them with him wherever he went. Later on, he even brought them with him to morning court. There were some people who complained about this, but since the Emperor didn't blame them, they couldn't say anything. The 2 memorials written by official Fang arrived at Shang Junlin's desk one after another, explaining the true situation in Subei. The first one arrived earlier, and the other one arrived at the palace 7 days later through official channels. This one was deliberately released by Fang Jun to deceive others. Shang Junlin finished reading the 2 memorials and picked up the one that arrived later. It says that everything in Subei is normal, the disaster situation isn't serious, and the supplies they brought are just enough. Then this one is about the suspicious points in Subei. Shen Yu picked up the other one, but didn't open it. How's the situation in the Subei army? If there were only problems within the officials, the matter would be easier to solve. If there were also problems within the Subei army, it would be troublesome. Fang Jun hasn't found any abnormalities for the time being. When I was in Subei, I separated the Subei army from the Subei army's official system. The 2 sides operate independently and don't interfere with each other. Shang Junlin had done this because he didn't feel at ease leaving the Subei army in the hands of the Subei army's officials. Your Majesty didn't send Gu Huai and the Hidden Dragon Guards just to secretly protect official Fang, right? Shen Yu walked around and sat down next to Shang Junlin. You knows me well. Their true goal is the Subei army. I need to understand the situation in the Subei army. Subei was an important barrier between Dahuan and the Northern Desert. The existence of the Subei army deterred the Northern Desert from sending troops south. Every time the Northern Desert army tried to invade Dahuan, they would be stopped outside the pass by the Subei army. Late at night, Subei. Men in black sneaked into the Subei army like ghosts and didn't make a sound. They were all wearing black masks, which reflected a cold metallic glow under the faint moonlight. Who is it? Shuv, a silver dagger was pressed against his neck, and a cold aura enveloped him. Who are you? Do you know that trespassing into a military camp is a serious crime? If you don't tell us, no one will know that someone was here tonight. A hoarse voice came from behind. The man wanted to turn around, but the moment he moved, the dagger on his neck sank into his flesh. He was so scared that he didn't dare to move again. Let's talk nicely. Let's talk nicely. Let me ask you. Do you know that the Imperial Court sent people to Subei? I know. They're here for disaster relief. What else do you know? Speak. The dagger pierced his skin, causing him to feel a stinging pain. I really don't know anything else. I'll talk. They seemed to be very concerned about the Subei army situation and the disaster there. Some of the supplies they brought with them were stolen before they reached Subei. That's all I know. Really? The man behind him asked a few more questions. The last sentence scared him so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. I know you entered the Subei army through connections. It's best if you don't tell anyone about what happened tonight. I'm sure the people behind you don't want to see the spy they spent so much effort to send into the Subei army disappear without a trace before he could do anything. The grip on his neck loosened. The man turned his head to look. There was no one else in the tent except for himself. If it weren't for the wound on his neck reminding him that everything that had happened was real, he would have suspected that he was having a nightmare. He touched his neck, but he didn't feel any blood. Refusing to believe it, he got up and walked to the basin where the water was and leaned over to look. His neck was really intact. Could it be that it was really just a dream? The man touched his neck, puzzled. He really was a high-ranking official of Subei who had inserted him into the Subei army. On the surface, his identity had nothing to do with that official. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the Subei army. Only a few people knew about this. He wanted to pass on what had just happened to his superiors, but he suddenly realized that something was wrong. He forced himself to suppress the idea. He couldn't gamble with his life. The next day, he indirectly asked the soldiers guarding outside the tent. Everyone said that nothing unusual had happened last night. Mr. Hu, did something happen? Mr. Hu subconsciously touched his neck. It's nothing. Is the general in the tent now? I have some questions about the disaster relief. Yes, this way please. The hidden dragon guards personally delivered the information about the Subei army to Shang Junlin. The Prime Minister seems to think highly of He Qingyu and the other two. Shen Yu glanced at Shang Junlin's open memorial. He has praised them several times. I heard that ever since the three of them started working for the Prime Minister has been able to spare some time to drink tea every day. He can also occasionally play chess with Jiang Huiqing and He Qingyu. Chapter 108. Shang Junlin was not annoyed at being exposed. Instead, he lifted Shen Yu's chin and said, Your Highness's authentic works should naturally be in my hands. What does you think? Your Highness is right, Shen Yu said with a smile. What about the ones I wrote for Jiang Huiqing? Does your Highness want to keep them in your hands too? Shang Junlin thought about it seriously. In fact, he wanted to keep them, but those were written for other people. They were different from the script. Seeing Shang Junlin thinking seriously, Shen Yu was overjoyed. Your Highness, you don't really want to keep those letters for yourself, do you? You wrote so many letters to him, but he never wrote to me even once. Shang Junlin was dissatisfied. He also wanted Shen Yu's handwritten letters. Your Highness is very busy every day. Don't you feel tired of reading the memorials and letters? If he was the one dealing with these matters, Shen Yu would not want to read these things in his free time at all. Can you write the same as them? I'm willing to read any amount. Shang Junlin's eyes were deep. Then Shen Yu dragged out the last word. What does your Highness want me to write? A love poem? A personal note? Or something else? Shang Junlin replied reservedly, I'm fine with anything. He wanted everything. Shen Yu smiled and glanced at him. I'll remember it. I'll write it for your Highness. Your Highness, you can wait patiently. Since he had agreed, Shen Yu began to think about what to write for Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin got the answer he wanted. He was much more efficient in approving memorials. Guijun, the small theater, sent a message saying that the play has been arranged. They want you to take a look. Mu Shi walked in from outside and said. Shin Yu was writing a letter. On the table, there was a pink letter paper. On the paper, there were peach blossoms. It was sent to the palace by Boss Yi last time. Together with it, there was a light blue and light green. According to Boss Yi, these letters sold very well and were very popular with the young masters and young ladies of aristocratic families. Even if the price was expensive, they could still be sold out quickly. Pink was suitable for expressing one's feelings. It was best used to write a letter to one's sweetheart to express one's yearning. If one was shy, light blue could be used instead. Shang Junlin specifically asked for pink paper, so Shin Yu asked Mu Shi to take out the pink paper from the storeroom. She planned to write a piece of pink paper first. The tip of the brush dipped in ink, and a beautiful hairpin-style small regular script appeared vividly on the paper. After finishing the last stroke, Shin Yu put away the brush and said, "Go and tell them that His Majesty and I will be there this evening." Yes, this servant will take her leave. After Mu Shi left, Shin Yu looked at the pink letter on the table and couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that the decisive His Majesty would ask for a small letter in private? When the ink on the paper was dry, Shin Yu put the letter away and put it in the envelope prepared in advance. The envelope was also sent by Boss Yi. The seal was printed with peach blossom so that people could see what the content of the letter would be at a glance. The effect of medical alcohol had been verified. How to produce alcohol on a large scale became a big problem. Shin Yu's method was still too inefficient. The Imperial Institute of Medicine had now obtained the method to produce alcohol. They also asked for several sets of glass equipment from the palace and made several spare rooms for the production of medical alcohol. In order to avoid confusion with alcohol, they were thinking about a new name for medical alcohol. Alcohol concentration is too high to drink directly. It will be life-threatening. Could it be that those who were poisoned by alcohol in the past were poisoned because they drank too high of alcohol concentration? Was it because someone poisoned them or they ate something that was harmful to them? Over the years, deaths caused by drinking were not rare. Countless doctors had studied this problem, but they still couldn't find a solution. After investigation, they found that these people who died had almost nothing in common except drinking. It's not impossible. The person who sent the alcohol from the palace also repeatedly warned that the alcohol produced by this method should not be drunk. If it wants to have an effect on the wound, it must be mixed accurately. Otherwise, not only will it not reduce the wound infection, but it will also cause secondary damage to the wound. The Imperial Institute of Medicine's envoy, Imperial Dr. Wu, emphasized again, "Remember, it must be made strictly according to the ratio." Yes. Gu Chong, come with me. Imperial Dr. Wu was old and had planned to retire. Imperial Dr. Gu was the junior he thought highly of. Although he was still young, his medical skills were brilliant and he was steady in doing things. He was the most promising successor. He also vaguely expressed his opinion to His Majesty. He knew that in terms of qualifications, Imperial Dr. Gu was not as good as the other two, but in terms of other things, Imperial Dr. Gu was the most suitable. I called you out to tell you that I will be retiring at the end of this year at the latest. I have recommended you to His Majesty to take over the position of envoy. You must perform well during this time. Imperial Dr. Wu patted Imperial Dr. Gu's shoulder. This. Imperial Dr. Gu was stunned for a moment. There are many more people in the Imperial Institute of Medicine who are more qualified than me. Why would you recommend me? I believe in your medical skills and I believe in your character. I also know that you are young and it will be difficult for you to control the people below. Don't worry, I will arrange everything. Since you have taken care of His Majesty's health, His Majesty will not make things difficult for you. Before making this decision, Imperial Dr. Wu had thought about it for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly irrational decision. He could feel that the Imperial Institute of Medicine was going through some changes in the Great Huan Kingdom. At this time, the person in charge was especially important. If it was any other time, it would be fine for the person in charge to be mediocre. But in the vortex of change, mediocrity would become the original sin. The two people who were talking didn't notice that someone was quietly following them and listening to their conversation. Imperial Dr. Sun hid behind a pillar, his face extremely ugly. Last time, he took Imperial Dr. Gu's position to treat Prince Yu. He thought that by saving the prince's life, he could at least get something. Who would have thought that not long after, Prince Yu was condemned by the Imperial Court? Not to mention a reward, it would be good if he wasn't implicated. After that incident, he hid like a quail for a period of time. Seeing that Imperial Dr. Gu was getting more and more powerful, he couldn't sit still anymore. When Imperial Dr. Wu asked Imperial Dr. Gu out alone, he knew something would happen, so he quietly followed. He never thought that he would let himself hear such a conversation. He entered the Imperial Institute of Medicine earlier than Imperial Dr. Gu, and his medical skills were not inferior. Why did Imperial Dr. Wu pass the position to someone who wasn't qualified? And he even tried his best to pave the way for him. Was it just because Imperial Dr. Gu took care of His Majesty's health? Imperial Dr. Sun glared in Imperial Dr. Gu's direction. He waited until the two finished talking and left before coming out from behind the pillar. He wouldn't let it go just like that. That position anyone could sit, except for Imperial Dr. Gu. In the evening, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin arrived at the small opera house together. When they heard that His Majesty the Emperor was coming with His Majesty the Emperor, the people in the opera troupe were very nervous. They still remembered that when His Majesty first came, he had a cold aura that made people not dare to look directly at him. Be careful. This time, we are going to show His Majesty the Emperor if there is anything that needs to be changed. In a few days, you will have to face the people of the entire capital. The troop leader inspected carefully, trying to make sure that there were no mistakes. I think that facing His Majesty is more terrifying than facing the people of the entire capital. A young man muttered softly. The others nodded in agreement. Of course, they would rather face a group of people below the stage. After all, that was a scene that they were familiar with. But I'm still very happy to be able to perform for His Majesty. Since that time, His Majesty has only summoned the troop leader to meet him alone. I'm so envious of the troop leader. The troop leader had already walked to their side. The others were silent, and the young man who just spoke also hurriedly lowered his head. The troop leader wanted to ease the atmosphere and said, "If you have to face His Majesty's oppressive gaze when meeting His Majesty, would you still be willing?" It turned out that not only would they have to meet His Majesty, they would also have to meet His Majesty. The young men widened their eyes as if to say, "Troop leader, you're so pitiful." The troop leader's mouth twitched. "All right, hurry up and get ready. His Majesty and His Majesty will be here soon." Because Shang Junlin was jealous, Shen Yu didn't come to the small theater anymore. Every time he wanted to come, he would be stopped by Shang Junlin for various reasons. If it happened once or twice, it could be said that it was a coincidence. However, after 4 or 5 times, Shen Yu understood that Shang Junlin was doing it on purpose. If their performance doesn't meet my requirements, how does Your Majesty plan to compensate me? That's their problem. Why are you blaming me? Your Majesty, you really don't know. Shen Yu poked his arm. Who was the one who found all kinds of reasons to not let me come to the small theater to see the progress? I've already given such detailed instructions, but they still can't perform. You might as well directly replace them. Your Majesty, you can't say that. The performance this time is not the same as the previous ones. It's normal that they can't grasp some parts. Later, in order to take care of Shang Junlin's emotions, Shen Yu called the troop leader to the main hall for questioning. Fortunately, the troop leader was a smart person. He knew the purpose of Shen Yu's arrangement. Not only did he perfectly implement Shen Yu's ideas, but he also made a lot of useful suggestions. After all, Shen Yu was a layman. His understanding of this aspect was not as good as that of the troop leader, who grew up in primary school. After improvement, the performance of this play would be better. Your Majesty has arrived. Your Majesty. The troop knelt down and saluted. No need to be so courteous. Today, I came with Your Majesty just to be the first to see this play. Shang Junlin sat down with Shen Yu. Let Mu Shi and eunuch Meng sit at the back and watch. Shen Yu glanced at the palace servants standing at the side. They sat in the middle of the front row with the best view. There were many empty seats behind them. Shen Yu glanced at them and simply let the troop members sit at the back. At the beginning, there was a cheerful piece of music. The beginning of the story was also cheerful. Gradually, the music became sad. The two childhood sweethearts had to separate. One went to the north to join the army, and the other stayed in her hometown. In the blink of an eye, a few years had passed. Natural disasters came and starved people were everywhere. The woman who stayed in her hometown made a lot of money in the business world. Thinking of her lover who was far away in the disaster area, she decided to do something. The imperial court's relief food was embezzled by the corrupt officials. They organized people to donate money and food. More and more people joined the team. The imperial court also sent new officials to punish the corrupt officials. These life-saving supplies were gathered by the people little by little to the disaster area. In the end, the evil people were punished. The woman and her lover hugged each other tightly after the disaster passed. Everyone was happy. Shen Yu stood up and clapped his hands. Not bad, this is very good. On the stage, the man in pink who played the role of the woman heard these words and his eyes lit up. Shen Yu turned to look at the palace servants and the other members of the troupe. Everyone's face was full of excitement. Obviously, their emotions had been completely stirred up. This was the effect that Shen Yu wanted. The play didn't need to be obscure or elegant. The most important thing was that it could make the audience feel immersed. They couldn't help but think. What should they do in such a situation? What could they do? Now that there was a drought in the north, could they also do something? Could she also be like the woman in the play and do her part? No matter how small a person's strength is, when gathered together, it is an unshakable force. Shang Junlin understood this principle very well. Yes, some people will always ignore that many little things make a mickle. People who are too arrogant will fall sooner or later. Shen Yu discussed some details with the troop leader and returned to the bedroom with Shang Junlin. Yu, did you notice that the man in pink has been moving closer to you? Shang Junlin approached Shen Yu from behind. No. Shen Yu's mind was on the play. He didn't have time to pay attention to these things. Pleased by Shen Yu's answer, Shang Junlin laughed in a low voice. Shen Yu's ears were numb from his laughter. Didn't His Majesty want me to write a letter to you? I've written it. Shen Yu walked to the secret compartment and took out the envelope. I've written 23 letters to Jiang Huiqing. I've written twice to His Majesty. This is the first letter. Does His Majesty want to see it? Chapter 109. Shang Junlin reached out his hand. Use good intentions, I will not disappoint you. Your Majesty can think that way. Shen Yu looked at him with a faint smile and put the letter in his big palm. Shang Junlin didn't open the letter in front of Shen Yu, but put it in his arms. Your Majesty, don't you want to see what I wrote? As long as it's written by a you, I will like it. Shin Yu saw that he really didn't want to open the letter immediately, so he didn't force him. In fact, he was quite curious about Shin Yu's reaction when he read the letter. At night, after Shin Yu fell asleep, Shang Junlin looked at the sleeping face of the person in his arms with tenderness in his eyes. Under the soft candlelight, the young man's facial features were delicate, and there was a faint blush on his white skin. Shang Junlin knew how beautiful the young man's cheeks were when they were dyed red. The young man's eyelashes were very long, and they drooped down quietly, like a resting butterfly. Shang Junlin had lived in the palace since he was a child, so he had seen countless beauties. When he first ascended the throne, there were many who dared to approach him because of their beauty. He only felt disgusted when these people touched him. No matter how beautiful they were no different from ordinary people in his eyes, until he met Shin Yu. For the first time, he had a strong desire to touch someone. For the first time, he wanted to hold someone in his arms. For the first time, he wanted to trap someone and not let them leave at all costs. Shin Yu now took the initiative to find a comfortable sleeping position in his arms, and he was also used to sleeping with the person in his arms. After confirming that Shin Yu was asleep, Shang Junlin sat up gently and took out the letter under his pillow. He opened the letter with half expectation and half apprehension, then slowly took out the pink letter and opened it. What came into view was a beautiful hairpin-style small regular script. Shang Junlin was stunned. He had seen Shin Yu's semi-cursive script, cursive script, and running regular script, but it was the first time he saw this kind of handwriting. "What are you secretly looking at, Your Majesty?" Shin Yu's voice sounded with a slight smile. Shang Junlin tilted his head and saw Shin Yu looking at him with a teasing look in his eyes. "You hasn't slept yet." Shang Junlin blushed a little. "If I slept, wouldn't I not be able to see Your Majesty secretly reading my letter in the middle of the night?" Shin Yu propped herself up. Her long hair flowed down her shoulders like a waterfall. The young man's face appeared particularly gentle under the candlelight. Only his eyes were shockingly bright, like stars shining in the dark night sky. Shang Junlin turned his body slightly and covered Shin Yu's eyes with one hand. "You wrote it. We like it very much." Shin Yu's eyes were covered, so he couldn't see the man's face that was getting redder and redder. He blinked, and his eyelashes fluttered like feathers across the man's palm. The numbness spread from her palm to her heart. "It's good that Your Majesty likes it." Shin Yu was also very nervous when he wrote the letter. His literary talent seemed to have lost its effectiveness. In the end, he only left a few simple and straightforward sentences. Yu's handwriting is very beautiful. It's as beautiful as Yu's." Shang Junlin sighed softly. Shin Yu removed the hand covering his eyes, sat up, and faced Shang Junlin. "Only use this handwriting when I write to Your Majesty." It was only displayed in front of one person, and only bloomed for one person. His eyes were full of sincerity. Some emotions were hidden in a very deep place, and were faintly revealed to the outside world. Shang Junlin's Adam's apple bobbed. He forcefully pulled Shin Yu into his arms. "We're very happy, Yu. We'll never let you down." Shin Yu raised and lowered his hands. After a few times, he seemed to have made up his mind. He wrapped his arms around the man's waist. "Your Majesty, you promised me. You can't go back on your words." "How can we go back on our words?" Shang Junlin lowered his head and kissed Shin Yu's hair. The faint fragrance lingered, and his entire heart calmed down. Shin Yu leaned on the man's shoulder and slowly closed his eyes. If it was Shang Junlin, he was willing to try again. Looking at his life, he was bumpy when he was young. After he became an adult, he had been deceived. Even after he died, he was told that his life was used to help others. Shin Yu was never willing to accept his fate easily. Therefore, when he knew that he was deceived in his previous life, he destroyed Prince Yu's dream of ascending the throne. In this life, he wouldn't let the ending in the book happen. If he could destroy the ending once, he could destroy it a second time. The only exception was Shang Junlin, the cruel and heartless tyrant in the book, who caused the people of Dahuan to live in misery, wasn't as the book said. On the contrary, he was diligent and loved the people. He also gave Shinyu a sense of reality. On a day off, Imperial Dr. Sun brought a pot of good wine and visited a colleague. It was Imperial Dr. Qian, who had the same rank as Imperial Dr. Gu in the Imperial Hospital. Imperial Dr. Qian was a slightly fat middle-aged man. He looked very amiable. Because of his kind face, he was very popular. Originally, Imperial Dr. Wu was retiring, and Imperial Dr. Qian was supposed to be the new Imperial Doctor. What brings Imperial Dr. Wu here? Please come in. Imperial Dr. Qian smiled before speaking. He was so polite that no one could find any fault with him. Recently, I found a pot of good wine and specially brought it for you to taste. Imperial Dr. Sun raised his hand that was holding the wine pot. The smile on Imperial Dr. Qian's face deepened. He loved wine, but he couldn't drink when he was on duty in the Imperial Hospital. He could only drink a little during his break. When the two entered the room, Imperial Dr. Qian ordered the servants to serve wine and dishes. If you don't mind, Imperial Dr. Sun can stay and drink a few cups with me. Imperial Dr. Sun came with a purpose, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. Then it would be impolite for me to refuse. Imperial Dr. Qian asked the servants to set up a table in the small courtyard and sat down face to face with Imperial Dr. Sunday. After 3 rounds of wine, Imperial Dr. Sun was a little drunk. He thought about his purpose of coming here and said, "There is one thing, but I don't know if I should say it." "What is it?" "If it's convenient, you can say it. Maybe I can help you solve your problems." "It's about the Imperial Hospital. You should know that Imperial Dr. Wu is retiring soon. There are only a few people who are qualified to be the next Imperial Doctor. If it was someone else, I wouldn't say anything, but I feel that it's not worth it for you." Imperial Dr. Sun was filled with righteous indignation. The smile on Imperial Dr. Qian's face disappeared. "Oh. In fact, everyone in the Imperial Hospital thinks that you are the most qualified to be the next Imperial Doctor. Whether it is qualifications or other things, if the one who sits in that position is you, no one will have any objections. But someone took a shortcut and used his relationship with the nobles in the palace to take your position." Imperial Dr. Sun drank a mouthful of wine. His words seemed to be defending Imperial Dr. Qian. The current Imperial Doctor is still Imperial Dr. Wu. It's not good to jump to conclusions about the future. Imperial Dr. Sun should be careful with your words. Imperial Dr. Qian put down the wine cup. Imperial Dr. Sun looked at Imperial Dr. Qian's face and felt that the other party was not very happy. He thought that his words had an effect, so he continued, "No matter what, the one who sits in that position should be someone like you. And don't think that I am talking nonsense. I can guarantee that everything I said is true." It was Imperial Dr. Wu who said it himself. Imperial Dr. Sun looked around and lowered his voice. "Then what do you want me to do?" Imperial Dr. Qian calmly asked. "At least, you can't let someone who is not worthy sit in that position." Imperial Dr. Sun stated his final goal. "I know. Imperial Dr. Sun is drunk. Come, help Imperial Dr. Sun to rest." The servants came over and helped Imperial Dr. Sun up. Ignoring his protests, they took him to the guest room. When Imperial Dr. Sun's figure disappeared, a young man came out of the corner. It was Imperial Dr. Gu. Imperial Dr. Gu's mood was very complicated. He knew that Imperial Dr. Sun had always been at odds with him, but he didn't think that the other would do such a thing to deal with him. If he really succeeded, the people of the Imperial Hospital would be divided and it would bring great trouble. It's good that teacher has good eyes and saw that this person has bad intentions. He told us to guard against him. I don't know who else he went to visit other than me. Imperial Dr. Qian looked with disgust in the direction that Imperial Dr. Sun left. I don't know how I provoked him. Imperial Dr. Gu grimaced. Since I entered the Imperial Hospital, I have been targeted everywhere. This is not your fault. The villain is used to being jealous of the virtuous. Imperial Dr. Qian patted his shoulder. Don't worry. Teacher has told us. We will help you in the future. There were several students of Imperial Dr. Wu in the Imperial Hospital. Imperial Dr. Qian was one of them. Imperial Dr. Wu knew the conduct of these students. Before he talked to Imperial Dr. Gu alone, he had talked with these students. Compared to fighting for power, his students preferred to study medicine. They didn't have any objections to their teacher's actions. You don't have to worry about Imperial Dr. Sunday teacher will take care of it. Thank you. Imperial Dr. Gu cupped his hands and thanked him. Because he was young, Imperial Dr. Wu took good care of him when he first entered the Imperial Hospital. Later, because he was indeed talented in medical skills, several of Imperial Dr. Wu's students gradually became good friends with him. If you want to thank us, why don't you take out your new medical book and discuss it with us? When I finish, I will ask for your advice. Imperial Dr. Sun didn't know that he thought he could provoke the conflict between the other Imperial doctors in the Imperial Hospital and Imperial Dr. Gu, but the first one to be dealt with was himself. By the way, have you seen the popular return to spring in the capital recently? It's your day off. Why don't you go and see it together? In addition to loving wine, Imperial Dr. Qian also liked to watch opera. This time, the people who watched the new opera were full of praise. Imperial Dr. Qian had been itching for a long time. Imperial Dr. Gu couldn't refuse and went with Imperial Dr. Qian. Shen Yu wanted to experience the feeling of sitting in the crowd and watching opera. He found a day when Shang Junlin wasn't busy and went out with him. There were many people in the opera. In order not to cause a sensation, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin disguised themselves. Shen Yu changed into a red robe this time. He was flamboyant like fire. His facial features were bright. Not only was his aura not suppressed by the red robe, but he was even more beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu in a red robe. His eyes were full of unconcealable amazement and strong possessiveness. He didn't want others to see Shen Yu like this at all. Mu Shi was about to tie Shen Yu's hair with a waterfall behind her head. Shang Junlin walked over. Give it to me. Mu Shi handed the hair tie and ivory comb to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin used one hand to tuck Shen Yu's long hair behind his back. The long black hair slid through his fingers. He held the ivory comb in his other hand and gently combed it. The ivory comb went into the black hair and smoothed it to the end. Shen Yu touched his hair behind his back. Your Majesty, do you know how to do it? Shang Junlin proved with his ability that not only did he know how to do it, but he also knew how to do it very well. The hair he combed was no worse than Mu Shi's. Shen Yu looked at himself in the bronze mirror and asked curiously, when did your Majesty learn how to comb people's hair? Mu Shi covered her mouth and laughed. She still remembered that not long ago, the high and mighty emperor clumsily learned how to comb people's hair. I learned it from your maid. How is my skill? Shang Junlin held the ivory comb and looked at him with a smile. Very good. Shen Yu's eyes were full of praise. I will comb Yu's hair in the future, okay? Chapter 110. As long as your Majesty doesn't find it troublesome. Shen Yu looked at himself in the mirror again. The bronze mirror was polished until it was shiny, clearly reflecting the young man's appearance. With snow-white skin and black hair, he looked like an elegant young master in this chaotic world. How can it be troublesome to comb Yu's hair? Shang Junlin walked over and lifted a strand of hair on his shoulder. He said in a half-joking tone, "Yu is so beautiful that I don't want others to see it. What should I do?" Shen Yu always knew that his appearance wasn't bad. It wasn't the first time he had been praised for his appearance, but when Shang Junlin said it in a possessive tone, his heart still trembled. "Then your majesty must keep an eye on me so that I won't be snatched away by others." Shen Yu's lips curled up, his eyes mischievous. "I won't give anyone a chance. You can't go anywhere except by my side." Thinking of the possibility of Shen Yu standing beside others, Shang Junlin's lips flattened. Shen Yu comforted him with ease, "Your Majesty, don't worry. I won't go anywhere except by your Majesty's side." Shen Yu sat in front of the bronze mirror and painted his face. After a while, his eyebrows and eyes looked very different from before. His facial features were brighter and more flamboyant. If one looked closely, they could still see some similarities with his original appearance. Shang Junlin also changed his appearance and changed into a navy blue uniform. Shen Yu walked around him in a circle. "Your Majesty also looks good in this color." Shang Junlin rarely wore colors other than black. Shen Yu was used to seeing him in black. Suddenly seeing him in another color gave him a sense of novelty. Shang Junlin's facial features were handsome, belonging to the kind of beauty that was very oppressive. The lines of his face were sharp. After the disguise, the original sharpness was neutralized, and it was no longer as unbearable as before. The blue uniform suppressed his aura, giving people a kind of illusion of gentleness. Although his face didn't change much, people wouldn't associate him with the emperor of the Great Huan dynasty. The two of them got into the carriage and left the palace. Shen Yu was also very familiar with this carriage. When he got on, he found that the place where he sat was covered with a soft blanket. Some time ago, Shen Yu felt that it was too hot, so he asked Shang Junlin to remove the blanket. "Wait for this year's autumn hunt. I'll make a tiger pelt for you." Shang Junlin sat beside Shen Yu and rubbed his earlobe. "Will His Majesty give me whatever I want?" Shen Yu was looking out of the window, but when he heard the question, he turned around. "As long as a Yu asks, we will do it for a Yu." Shang Junlin looked at him with determination. Shen Yu had no doubt that Shang Junlin could do what he said, but he was still stunned by the man's answer without hesitation. "If His Majesty continues to spoil me like this, I will become arrogant." Shen Yu collected his thoughts and looked at Shang Junlin seriously. "I give you the right to be arrogant." The hand that was rubbing his earlobe changed to caressing his cheek. Shen Yu's eyes curved slightly. "This is what His Majesty said. His Majesty, don't regret it in the future. Falling in love with a Yu, we will never regret it." The weather turned cold, and the number of people on the streets suddenly increased. The carriages moved in an orderly manner on the street. When they arrived at the opera house, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin got off the carriage. There were people coming and going outside the opera house. People gathered in groups of 3 to 5, talking as they walked inside. The favorite concubine of a certain emperor of Dahuan loved to listen to opera. The emperor followed suit, and the opera industry of Dahuan developed greatly during that time. After a few generations, the favorite concubine and the emperor of Dahuan had become characters in the opera. The opera was also deeply rooted in the hearts of the people of Dahuan. The Haunted Opera House was an old opera house that had been passed down for several generations. The best opera troupe in the opera house was specially for the nobles to enjoy. The other opera troupes performed for the common people. If they were favored by a certain influential person, they could also perform in the influential person's house. The first floor was the hall. Most of the common people would choose to listen to the opera here. The second floor was a private room separated by a partition. Each guest had a separate space. It was most suitable for influential people or tycoons to bring their family or friends here. Will the two guests be on the first floor or in a private room? The opera will start in a quarter of an hour. You two came at the right time. Otherwise, you will have to wait for a while. I want a private room on the second floor. Okay, please follow me. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin walked into the private room on the second floor. The space was not big, but the decoration was very delicate. There were some snacks on the table in the middle. Because there were only two of them, they asked for a private room for two. Do the two of you need someone to wait on you? No need. A quarter of an hour later, the story of returning to spring officially started. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin sat together and watched. He was the one who wrote the skeleton of the opera. He knew the development of the story very well. What he saw more was the reaction of the audience below. They chose a very good position. Whether it was the stage below or the people who were listening to the opera, they could all see it. A Yu's opera is very well arranged, Shang Junlin said softly. Your Majesty, do you think there will be officials coming to watch? If Shin Yu remembered correctly, there were many officials in Dahuan who liked to watch operas. Yes. Look over there. That's the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Works. Shang Junlin pointed in a direction. Shin Yu looked over. Sure enough, the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Works were wearing casual clothes and sitting in the crowd on the first floor. Are they so close in private? They could even get together to watch operas. It turns out that they are not that close. Before the Ministry of Works could support itself, it was not an exaggeration to say that their relationship was like fire and water. Later, when EU proposed the idea of sponsorship, they became closer and closer, Shang Junlin explained. Could it be that their relationship is not good because the Ministry of Works has been asking the Ministry of Revenue for money? Shin Yu felt that it was a little inconceivable. From the looks of it, that is the case. Is there any progress from the Ministry of Works? Ever since the first cement road was paved, Shin Yu had not paid attention to the follow-up for a long time. The second road is almost finished. There will be results after a while. The Ministry of Works said that if this plan is feasible, they can gradually replace the roads in the capital with cement roads. They also discovered that cement can be used for construction. They use cement to build a small house, and it is said that it is very sturdy. Shin Yu was just asking. After hearing the reply, he no longer cared about this matter. There were so many people in the Ministry of Works. It was impossible that they could not handle this matter well. Shin Yu looked around and looked at the second floor. He saw a familiar face again. The Prime Minister is also here. He even brought along Jiang Huiqing, He Qingyu, and Fang Jiai. In order to not attract attention, Fang Jiai was dressed as a man. The Prime Minister thinks highly of He Qingyu and the other two. He even praised them in the memorial he presented yesterday. How could he not think highly of them? With the addition of these three people, the Prime Minister's daily workload could be reduced by more than half. The Prime Minister dreamed that one day, all the officials in Dahuan could be like these three people. He did not ask for anything else, but at least they should do their job well. As a result, many officials who had been promoted by the Prime Minister could not do their job well. They also stared at the power of others all day long. They could not do anything, and they always caused a mess for the Prime Minister to clean up. Sometimes, I feel that the Prime Minister went against the aristocratic families because he could not stand the style of these aristocratic family officials. Shang Junlin thought of some past events and could not help but laugh. The Prime Minister's family should not be low. It is not low. In the beginning, his relationship with the aristocratic family officials was not so bad. Otherwise, he would not have been able to enter the cabinet so easily. After becoming the prime minister, he had to clean up the mess made by the aristocratic families every few days. Over time, the relationship between the two sides became more and more strained. Shang Junlin was naturally happy to see this scene. The prime minister was listening to the play seriously. He originally did not plan to come. Even if it was a rest day, he still had a lot of things to deal with. It was Jiang Huiqing who suggested to him that he should properly relax after being busy. He thought about the countless days and nights he had been busy with official affairs and deeply felt that he should take a break. Therefore, he brought the 3 people to listen to Return to Spring. He often went in and out of the palace, so of course, he knew the real purpose of this play. He brought the 3 people out to test their political acumen. During the intermission, he poured himself a cup of tea and asked, "Do you have any thoughts after watching this play?" This play alludes to the incident in Subei, right? The embezzlement of disaster relief supplies just happens to match up with the robbery. The imperial court has always been discussing the matter of donations. Now that the common people know the significance of donations through the play, once the imperial court officially announces this policy, there will be no unwarranted suspicion. It was not just in the capital. There were also theaters in other places performing this play. Moreover, because the play itself was sufficiently attractive, more and more people came to watch. The prime minister nodded approvingly. This time, the imperial examination had finally picked out some good seedlings. He was secretly planning how to quickly nurture the 3 of them. With one more person to share the burden on his shoulders would be lighter. During the intermission, the common people below began to discuss. The corrupt officials are too much. There are so many soldiers and common people at the border who are still waiting for food to save their lives. They actually embezzled the food and money. That's right. With my bad temper, I want nothing more than to rush up and blow his head off. Lao Nyang and the others have already begun to prepare food. I hope they can make it in time. Otherwise, with the enemy at the border, the soldiers at the border won't even have food to eat. How will they protect the country? That's why they say the corrupt officials have no heart. They don't even think about it. If the enemy invades, even if they have so much money, what's the use? Say, if Lao Nyang can prepare food and send it to the border, can't we do the same? Subei is in a drought. Lord Fong was ordered to provide relief, but he was met with bandits. Right now, we don't know what the situation is over there. Can we do something for Subei? If we can successfully send the food to Subei, I'm willing to donate half of my family's food. Beyond Subei is the northern desert. The northern desert has been eyeing the Great Huan for a long time. If His Majesty hadn't beaten them until they were afraid, how could they have so easily stopped? It's only been a few years since the Great Huan has been peaceful. If something happens to Subei, the northern desert will definitely make a comeback. We can't let the northern desert have a chance to invade the south. Just like Lao Nyang said, to protect the country, everyone should do their part. Moreover, many little drops make an ocean. Although our abilities are limited, what if we have 100, 1,000, or 10,000 people? We can at least make a difference. That's right. Does anyone know anyone from the government? Can we express our views to the imperial court? The discussion below became more and more heated. Shen Yu picked up the teacup and took a sip. The corners of his mouth curved slightly. He had already achieved half of his goal. Did you rehearse for this scene in the beginning? Shang Junlin also heard the discussion and a complicated look flashed through his eyes. Your Majesty, what I want is not an order from the imperial court, but an opportunity for the people to fight for themselves. How lucky I am to have Yu's help. Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu and planted a light kiss on the side of his face. Chapter 111. As a king, Shang Junlin certainly knew the difference between the two. I originally thought that you arranged this play just to make the people more accepting of the donations. I didn't expect that there was a deeper meaning. You asked me to delay the time, so you were waiting for this opportunity. Shin Yu nodded. I always feel that those people have a backup plan. They stole a batch of supplies, so they definitely won't watch us collect enough supplies to send to Subei again. Shang Junlin, what I'm most worried about is that the people from the northern desert have infiltrated the officials of Subei. According to the news from the hidden dragon guards, they haven't found any traces of the people from the northern desert. Shin Yu, the northern desert is undoubtedly the most beneficial to the disaster in Subei. Without the threat of the northern army, Subei is undoubtedly in the bag for the northern desert. Your Majesty thinks that it's not strange that the people from the northern desert are involved, but I'm more inclined to think that it's done by someone in Dahuan. Your Majesty, don't forget that the King of Yu is still in the secret prison. Shang Junlin, Yu suspects that it's the people behind the King of Yu. Shin Yu, if the King of Yu wants that position, food, gold, and silver are all indispensable. Your Majesty, did you send people to the King of Yu's fief? The King of Yu had been detained in the capital for so long, but there was no movement in his fief. This was an abnormal thing. Your Majesty can use the donation as an excuse to investigate the King of Yu's fief. After a cup of tea's time, the second half of the play continued. The discussion below slowly disappeared, and everyone's attention turned back to the play. On the other side, in a private room. Noticing that Imperial Physician Gu was obviously not in the right state, Imperial Physician Qian poured a cup of tea for him. What are you thinking about? I seem to have seen an acquaintance just now. Imperial Physician Gu paused for a moment and took the teacup. I don't know if I'm mistaken. Is it your good friend? Why don't you invite them over for a chat? Imperial Physician Gu shook his head. No need, I think they don't want to be disturbed. Seeing this, Imperial Physician Qian didn't say anything more. After the play ended, there was a thunderous applause below the stage. This ending is really satisfying. Corrupt officials should be beheaded in public like this. Chang Nyang has finally reunited with her lover after going through untold hardships. I am satisfied that our lovers have finally gotten married. Mother Chang's efforts were not in vain. The wicked were punished, and the good were rewarded. The disaster was resolved in time, and the enemies who wanted to take advantage of the situation were defeated. How satisfying! There were both men and women who came to watch the show. Both sides focused on different things, but no matter which side, they were all very satisfied with the ending. Shin Yu and Shang Junlin walked out of the opera house. Along the way, they could hear the discussions of the people around them. Apart from the story itself, the most talked about part of the story was the actions of Wu Nyang in the play. Chang Nyang was the embodiment of all the beauty of women in the world. She had the tenderness of a woman, but she also had the courage of a man. She dared to say and do what she wanted, and she was not afraid of difficulties. She had touched countless people. Since Chang Nyang in the play succeeded, does this mean that this method is feasible? I am also thinking about this problem. You and I are both businessmen, so we know that the treatment of businessmen in the Great Han Dynasty is much better than that of other courts. In the play, Chang Nyang's situation was so difficult, but she still succeeded in the end. Because of their actions, the situation of the businessmen at that time was changed. If we can contribute to the Great Northern Sioux, can we also change the way the world views businessmen? Scholars, farmers, businessmen, the ideas passed down from generation to generation were not easy to change. Even if the Great Han Dynasty was not harsh on businessmen, because of all kinds of inherent ideas, the status of businessmen was not high. No matter how much money they had in their hands, if they didn't spend a lot of money to bribe people, they could easily lose a lot of money. Even if they had to spend money to buy peace of mind, buy protection, they were willing to do so. However, in most cases, after the money was spent and the relationship was good, the other party could still back out at the last minute. Shen Yu's sponsorship and donations could prevent this from happening. Shen Yu's play had already been performed in the capital for several days, and local opera troupes had also started to rehearse this play. For each troupe, as long as there were people watching, it was the same no matter what they rehearsed. There were also storytellers who saw a business opportunity telling stories about Changnyang in restaurants and tea houses. The guests liked to listen, and they were happy to tell more. After a few days of fermentation, the government received a petition from the people. Not only the government, but also the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Revenue, and several other places received the petition. In the morning court, the Minister of Revenue directly took out the petition, reporting to Your Majesty, this official has received some letters from the people. Several other officials also stood up, reporting to Your Majesty, this official has also received them. Bring them to me to see. Outside the palace, Ancient Tower. Yan Zheng and more than a dozen businessmen were sitting in a private room. The leader was an elegant man in his 30s. They had just written a joint petition and handed it to the government. On the other side sat a few ordinary people, all of whom were well-known people in the neighborhood. They had gathered here to jointly write a petition. Everyone, don't worry. I have some friendship with an official in the Ministry of Revenue. He said that the Minister of Revenue will inform Your Majesty of our request today, the elegant man said. We naturally believe in young Master Jin's words. The others also spoke one after another. Young Master Jin had a lot of say among the businessmen in the capital. He was reliable, and everyone trusted him. This time, everyone had also recommended him to be in charge of this matter. After comforting the people, young Master Jin walked to Yan Zheng's side and said in a low voice, If you hadn't told me this, I wouldn't have dared to agree to this matter. Here's a toast to you. Brother Jin, you're too serious. When I first came to the capital, I received your help, but I wasn't able to thank you properly. This time, I only told you some information that I know. It's nothing much, Yan Zheng replied. When Shen Yu had wanted to decline the plan, he had asked Shang Junlin to conceal this information again. Unlike the officials, if the businessmen and ordinary people didn't have any connections, they wouldn't be able to find out about the imperial court's information. Yan Zheng knew about it because the Ministry of Works had accidentally leaked some information to him. There was also another reason. Yan Zheng had originally been waiting for the imperial court's order to donate a sum of money. He didn't expect that in the end, they would take the initiative to propose this matter. However, this was also good. It would be more beneficial for them and the imperial court. When Yan Zheng first saw Return to Spring, he had some vague guesses in his heart. Later, when he talked about this matter on the streets and alleys, his thoughts became clearer. Later, when he talked about cooperation with Shopkeeper Su seemed to have inadvertently mentioned it. He knew then that this was an excellent opportunity for him to enter the inner circle of the capital's businessmen. The small groups of businessmen in every place were xenophobic. In a place like the capital, it was even more so. He had been here for a while, but he still hadn't really integrated into the group until now. He knew in his heart who Shopkeeper Su was. The information that Shopkeeper Su revealed must have been from the people behind Shopkeeper Su. With an accurate answer, Yan Zheng privately looked for young Master Jin. After the two of them talked in detail, he met the most important person in the capital's business circle for the first time. If this matter went smoothly, he could use this matter to slowly gain a foothold. The waiting time always seemed exceptionally long. The sun gradually rose. Finally, a servant ran in with a happy face. That person has replied. His Majesty has agreed. Everyone's face lit up with joy. That's great. After this, our business should have fewer restrictions. After sitting down to discuss the specific matters of the donation, the group of people went back to make arrangements. Young Master Jean walked at the back with a relaxed smile on his face. He was a natural businessman and had always been sensitive to the trend of the imperial court. But this time, if it weren't for Yan Zheng's reassurance, he wouldn't have dared to take such a big risk. That day, when he helped Yan Zheng out of trouble, it was just a matter of convenience. He didn't expect that it would leave him with such a great good karma. Shen Yu was taking care of the flowers in Yuzhang Palace. Except for a pot sent by Imperial Physician Gu, the rest were sent by Shang Junlin. There were precious varieties, and there were also some that were sent purely because of their good growth. Shen Yu was not like Shang Junlin, who had a lot of free time every day. Every few days, he would personally take care of these flowers and plants. He would water them, loosen the soil, cut the branches, and so on. Mu Shi stood to the side with a clean handkerchief. Young Master, Shopkeeper Su sent a message saying that he has preliminarily discussed the cooperation with Young Master Yen. He also leaked the news to Young Master Yen according to your instructions. I heard that in the past 2 days, the merchants and people in the capital have ridden to the government together. There should be a conclusion today. This show has been going on for so long, it's time to end it. Officially of the Ministry of Revenue only knew what the Imperial Court was planning today. This matter was not disclosed to the outside world except for the Minister of Revenue, the Prime Minister, and a few other ministers. Even what Shen Yu told Yan Zheng was only a part of it. After the court, officially anxiously paced back and forth in the study. Finally, he made up his mind. He picked up a pen and hurriedly wrote something. Without waiting for the ink to dry, he put it in his pocket and walked out. The study door was opened, and Official Li's eyes widened in surprise. "You, where do you want to go, Official Li?" The visitor coldly raised the corner of his mouth. "Or rather, who do you want to send a message to?" I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't need to know. Come, take him away." Official Li was quietly taken away. After the morning court, Shang Junlin stayed behind with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue to discuss the details of the donation. Eunuch Meng walked in from outside and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, the spy in the Ministry of Revenue has been caught. Handed over to the Supreme Court to investigate. I want to see who is plotting against Dahuan." When Shang Junlin returned to Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu was still tending to the flowers. The hidden dragon guards caught a spy in the Ministry of Revenue. I handed him over to the Supreme Court. I hope they will be able to get something out of him. Shang Junlin walked over. I feel that it's not normal for it to be so peaceful now. Every time something happens in the Imperial Court, there will always be people secretly spreading unfavorable rumors about Your Majesty. Did Your Majesty find out who did it? Shen Yu put down the small shovel in his hand. I did. Don't worry, Shen Yu smiled. If they want to do anything this time, they will lose more than they gain. Shen Yu knew what those people would say without thinking. They would just blame Shang Junlin for the natural and man-made disasters. They might be waiting for the best time to act, but they didn't know that Shen Yu was also waiting for them to act. Not only would he not let these people get what they wanted, but he would also return the dirty water that they had slandered Shang Junlin in the past. Yu has taken good care of these flowers. Shang Junlin picked up the small shovel on the stone table and loosened the soil for the flowers that had not been loosened yet. I naturally have to take good care of the flowers sent by Your Majesty.